the agenda, Mr. Chair. The next item is public comment. Are there members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? We have a lot of people in the audience, but apparently they don't want to make any comment. Too bad. So we'll close the public comment session and we'll move on to commissioner comments. Commissioner comments? Rob?
Hi. Thanks everyone for being here on this Wednesday and up there in TV land. I want to just give a little selfish plug to a generous event that gives a lot of money to a lot of the nonprofits here in the Valley and nationwide and around the country, around the world. The Ducky Derby is this Saturday, so August 11th, this Saturday, down in the Rio Grande Park. There will be all sorts of events for all sorts of people, including food, and of course our big Ducky Derby race. I got some friends here joining me for our meeting today. Just a quick statistic: the Ducky Derby over the last 20 years has raised $2.3 million for over 65 nonprofits in the Roaring Fork Valley, as well as organizations around the world. The Aspen Rotary Club has put on this event for the last 20 years as their primary fundraiser. And by fundraiser, it really doesn't raise money for the event or for the organization. It raises money strictly really to give out to other nonprofits. All sorts of nonprofits throughout the Valley have gotten money from this event. Not only that, but it's also, there's an additional amount of money that's raised by the nonprofits themselves. So we give the opportunity for organizations such as the Buddy Program, Aspen Junior Hockey, Aspen Valley Ski Club. All of these organizations go out there and they sell their own ducks, and they get to keep about 95%, 98% of the money that they raise on their own. So it gets their kids involved in a philanthropic way, going out there and raising this money. A lot of you have probably noticed that the river is a little bit low this year, and traditionally what we do is we take about 30,000 ducks, we dump them into the river at No Name Bridge, and they go down past the Art Museum, and the first duck that goes down wins somebody $10,000 and a chance at winning $1 million. Well, unfortunately this year, because the river is a little bit low, we are going to probably have a very creative way of doing a duck race and getting the kids involved. So bring the kids down there. We're going to have different age groups, and we're going to have relay races where the kids dive in and grab a few ducks, toss them down to the next age group of kids. They'll dive in, grab a few ducks, toss them down to the next group of kids, and it'll all be a race for the kids. And ultimately, at the end, we will have a little bit of a waterfall type thing where all the last finalists of the ducks will go in. They'll get swirled around in this little waterfall, and we will have our own little duck race in the park. So just because the river's a little low, please come down and support the Ducky Derby. All of the costs for the event are paid for by sponsors. So all the money we raise via food, via tickets for the rides that are there and the different things that are going on go to these nonprofits. It's one of the most spectacular fundraising events that Aspen puts on. So,
thank you, Rob. Commissioners, other commissioners? George?
Thanks. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about the efforts of the Thompson Divide Coalition in terms of getting information out to the communities, public meetings, and just informing the community on the status of pending oil and gas development in the Thompson Creek area. Since that time, Senator Bennett has come out with a draft proposal that would protect all the public lands in Thompson Divide from any further oil and gas development. This is a huge step for the community in terms of addressing this issue. And Senator Bennett has a website that you can go on and you can make your comments, support his draft proposal, which will give him impetus to be able to lobby his colleagues in D.C. to push this proposed bill onto the Senate floor. The website is www.bennett.senate.gov/Thompson Divide. Again, even though this is perhaps not in the immediate Aspen area, it's in Pickens County, it's in our valley. It's important legislation to protect our environment, our waters, our forests, our wildlife, our way of life from further oil and gas development in a very unique and special place. So I encourage all citizens, business owners to take 5 minutes, go on Senator Bennett's website, provide your comments and your support for his draft proposal.
Thank you, George. Rachel, Jack?
No, thank you.
Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'd like to just compliment both our staff and the City of Aspen staff, maybe especially the City of Aspen staff, on their preparations for the Pro Challenge bike race. We got an update yesterday. They're really doing a great job cranking this thing out. Last year, of course, we felt there were a number of hurdles and took them one by one. This year, smooth. So compliments to all. We all look forward to a great week and a great several days of actual racing, both a finish and a start in our community.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, Rachel, you changed your mind?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I was just reminded of something, and that is to really mention to everyone we still need to be on our watch for fire danger. My niece and I were driving down Valley on Saturday and were there in time to see the fire above BOCC at the shooting range and saw one of the planes swooping in and dropping the load of fire suppression chemicals, whatever they might be. It was quite dramatic, and we were very glad to see it extinguished as quickly as it was, and that our great thanks go out to all the fire departments and the volunteers throughout our community who respond so quickly to items like that. So let's do our part and keep it safe out there. It seemed like we were in a good afternoon rain pattern there for a while, and now it's kind of dissipated, and things are back to that bone dry situation. So everyone keep on their guard, and we'll all have a safe August and September. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll move on to consent actions. We have the minutes of the work sessions of July 10th, July 17th, July 24th, 2012, and a regular meeting of July 25th, 2012. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The next item is a resolution appointing citizen board members.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
Yes, Jack.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike.
No, fine, go ahead.
Well, it's oftentimes our unofficial policy, you might say, to just recognize the citizens that we're appointing. So I'd like to do that at this point. Ashley Connerly and Doris Downey and Robin Van Domelen and Kid Solomon, our youth representative, to the Citizen Grant Review Board, and Lori Moore to the Senior Services Council.
Thank you, Jack. The Pickens County depends on volunteers to have a livable county, and the people who volunteer are valuable to Pickens County, and they're valuable to the entire community. And if you meet one of those volunteers, be sure to thank them for their efforts. So, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. The next item is a ratification of hearing officers' determinations, and Jeanette Jones. Jeanette, are you here? Do you want to just talk briefly about these determinations?
Okay. What you have before you today is the hearing officers' determinations of appeals of the assessor's valuation. Every year, beginning July 1st, which usually happens in the middle of July, property owners can appeal the assessor's valuation of their property values. And we begin those hearings typically, like I said, the middle of July. And this year, you all commissioners chose to appoint qualified hearing officers to hear these appeals on your behalf. And what's before you today is their determinations of those appeals. And the hearing officers are here today if you have any questions for them.
Thank you, Jeanette. Questions? Yes, George.
I have a question for the hearing officers, if one of them or all would come up. We've had a new format this year, part of it because of the new state legislative passage of ag codes. And this year, we, instead of having individual hearing officers hear individual cases, we had a panel of 3. And I'm just curious how that panel worked, because I know Steve and Jack, you've done this for several years, and Ken as well, as an individual hearing officer. I'm just curious how the process worked, and do you feel it was beneficial, not only for you, but for the applicant, the appealant?
I think it was beneficial. I think it really stirred extra discussion, and I think we all learned from each other.
I agree that we batted around the decisions. I think individually the decisions would be made the same. However, in this first round of these kinds of appeals with new legislation, it was beneficial to be able to speak with other hearing officers and ask questions as a group, because it is new legislation.
Good, well, thanks. Thanks for all your effort in that.
Any further questions? Yes, Jack. And then Rob.
Well, would you all be so kind to introduce yourselves, because I believe you really do provide an important community service from a professional perspective. I can remember my first years as commissioner, we were doing these, and it's not professional compared to people with the kind of background. So would you be so kind? Then I have a question, a comment.
My name's Steve Hawk. I am been a hearing officer here for probably 6-8 years. I am a licensed appraiser, real estate broker, and I do property management primarily.
Thank you.
I'm Jack Musser, and I'm a real estate broker, and this is my 4th summer doing this.
Thank you.
My name is Ken Call. I was a former assessor in Garfield County for 8 years. I've served 7 years as a hearing officer, 3 in Eagle and 4 here. I've attended 2 state classes with Jack Musser on the conducting hearings.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We all, as a community, appreciate the work. I noticed in preparing for today's meeting for ratification of your work that there were some points made that the legislation that was created relative to ag needed further work. So if you all would consider jotting down a few thoughts separate of the determinations about where we might go when we, the state of Colorado, CCI, Rachel and I, representing Picken County, really got this approved after a couple of years, we knew there'd be further work. So, clarification, it never was clarified, in the previous decades, as it were. We've made an important step forward where we have the ability to ask the question, how is it related to ag, how does it support it, whatever. But I'm sure there's further clarification, as you've already indicated. So you might give our staff some feedback about that, specific to that, so we can improve this. Maybe make it easier on both parties, meaning the property owners as well as the hearing officers and staff. Thank you.
Jack, what was the change in the agricultural status?
Well, previously it was so undefined, and the reason why Picken County got so involved in other counties was because people were taking advantage, quite frankly, of the ag classification, which lowered their taxes, reduced the taxes so significantly. It was, quite frankly, speaking only in my opinion, it was a joke. And now we're able to literally identify a 2-acre parcel that's for the primary residence, and the question to be asked is, in fact, is this residential property integral to the agricultural operation? And as these determinations say, there were good questions asked. The assessor, of course, comes in and provides his opinion. The property owner appeals, and the hearings were, and it was an excellent process, I think, by having 3 individuals there. We had kind of a hearing board. It was very fair, and going through these, there was a lot of agreement that the assessor was correct, and there was some modification and disagreement. So I think the process worked fantastic. Thanks for asking that, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, some people might not be aware there's a fairly significant change in the state legislature to affect that, and it was difficult. And our county attorney and Rachel and Jack made a real difference in the state legislature to get that change. Agriculture has been around longer than Colorado's been a state, and so it's hard to change those kind of things. So. Yes, Rachel.
Thank you. I'd like to say that we and the state of Colorado continue to support legitimate agriculture and the tax deduction or reduction that goes along with that. The question really had become, across the state, not just in Pickens County, a question of tax equity and fairness. And so the examples that the Assessors Association brought forward when this was beginning to be examined via task force at the state level, I was quite surprised to see how many examples came out of Cherry Creek, it came out of Front Range communities. It was not just the resort communities that were experiencing this, where within the same subdivision, one property owner may pay $50 in property tax for the year because they were claiming an agricultural exemption from perhaps grazing their property 2 weeks in the summer, and then the neighbor next door was not getting that same sort of fairness and was paying $3,000 or $4,000. So this was a real compromise with the entire agricultural community. I think they realized and came to the table through the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union that if they were not able to create a true fairness and tighten up the loophole, as it were, they may be in danger of losing their exemption altogether. And so we really owe a debt of thanks to Hap Channel, the Gunnison County Commissioner, and the one from the Front Range, I'm not sure if I can remember, Frank Webick, I think, who served on the task force on behalf of counties, but it was adopted by the state legislature and signed by the governor because the merits of the proposal were recognized by all.
One very quick, and I would add Tom Massey, because he took on that as a legislator, and you need somebody to run with the ball. So,
yes, Bob.
As a point of clarification, can somebody explain from here what happens? Is there another appeal process for these applicants if they're not happy with the decision that we're ratifying at this point?
We have Larry Fike from the Assessor's Office. Larry, do you have an explanation?
Yes. If somebody's not satisfied with the results of the County Board of Equalization hearing, they have 3 routes to appeal. They can either go to district court, or they can choose binding arbitration, or they can appeal to the State Board of Assessment Appeals. And I think the notice that Jeanette mails will outline the procedures for doing all of those.
Thanks, Larry. Any further discussion? Is there a motion? Do we ask for a motion yet? Do we have a motion?
I do not have one.
I'd like to move approval of the Board of Equalization's work relative to the ratification of hearing officers' determinations.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Gentlemen, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Jeanette does a really nice job, by the way, of organizing that procedure.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Jeanette.
The next items are consent actions. First reading set for a public hearing on August 21st. We have here a resolution authorizing the library ballot questions. Kathy Chandler and Tom Polkin. I haven't seen Tom. Is he back? He's back in the corner? Okay. So what's this about, Kathy?
Well, this is a request from the library board, who just passed a resolution about a half hour ago to ask you formally to please put 2 ballot questions on the November ballot for the library. One would be a bonding question that would give the library the ability to incur debt to do an improvement in addition to the library. And the other is for some additional tax revenue to operate the improved, renovated, in addition to the library.
I see here that the general obligation is $5.4 million. Is that all you need for the library expansion?
Our estimate is actually $10.3 million, and the library has $5.3 million in a capital reserve fund from 2 bequests that were received back in 1997, and they have been reserved by the library board for this purpose and invested by Tom Oakham and the retirement board, and have grown to the point where we have the 5.3, and we need an additional 5, we estimate. However, we are asking here for permission to put a request on the ballot for $5.4 million because the pricing is out right now with the cost estimators, and they will bring back a more finely honed number on August 21st. So hopefully this will come down a bit. But we've had to make some changes in the design of the building. We brought the canopy down and received approval from the city council in our land use application. And those changes in the design, we need to make sure that we've got our pricing in order.
So the library is essentially covering half the cost of this already without any tax obligation.
That's correct.
Do you want to...
Question on that, if you can.
Okay, yes, George.
Tom or Kathy. So how will the bond debt be repaid? Where's the revenue coming from that for the interest on that?
That same question authorizes a property tax levy sufficient to repay those bonds over their life. So we anticipate we probably issue 20-year debt. Could go longer, depends on the market conditions at the time. So there'd be a property tax levy for 20 years to repay that.
And then ideally, once that debt is paid, the property tax would go away.
Right. The one to repay the debt, right, after it's paid off. It drops out.
And the amount of the property tax, as an example, what a property owner might see on their tax bill, not this year, but in 2013?
Our estimate is that it would be between $16 and $17 on $1 million residential property.
And that's a combination of both the repayment of the debt and the second question, ballot question, asks for a $141,000 increase in the library's annual property tax levy that supports the operations. So the estimate is a combination of both of those property tax increases.
Yes, Rob.
In the bond question, it says that there will be a repayment cost of $10.2 million. I'm assuming that's the actual cash outflow with interest over that period of time.
That's correct.
So even though we're borrowing 5.4 million, we're going to be paying with the interest 10.2 million.
Actually, that's a maximum amount set in the question.
Okay.
And, there's room in there for interest rates to go up substantially, actually, between now and when we might issue the debt, just so that we have enough room. But our repayment cost will probably be less, well, it has to be less than the maximum. So that's just put in there to cap the total amount that we could be authorized to repay.
And do you have an estimate of what bond rates are these days?
Yeah.
Out of curiosity.
Right now, we think we could issue 20-year debt for about 3.6% on average. And we've calculated, we've allowed for that to go up by 2 percentage points in the parameters that are in the bonding question. So that's a pretty significant movement from where we are right now. So we've built in enough room to be able to, definitely issue this debt if it's authorized.
May I continue?
Sure.
So the next question is, you talk about, the next part of the ballot question is the tax issue, which is increased taxes by $460,000 a year annually. Although there's nothing in this question that refers to a 10-year bond, 20-year bond, 30-year bond, 100-year bond. So how do we determine when that tax stops getting levied to the people? For instance, if you just happen to choose a 30-year bond, well, then is this a 30-year tax? If you choose a 10-year bond, is this a 10-year tax?
Yes.
And how come the voters aren't getting that information in this question?
Basically, what the law requires is that we set these parameters. The maximum term by law is 30 years, so that's the most we could do. But that setting the maximum amount of property tax that we can collect in a single year to retire the debt is another parameter. And basically, the shorter the time period over which you retire the debt, the more property tax annually is going to be needed. So that was calculated for a 20-year bond at 5.5% or 6%, something like that, which is unlikely to come to pass. So that's where the property tax parameter comes from. But the question itself doesn't have to have the specific length of time that we would issue the bonds for. And that gives us the flexibility to look at the market at the time and choose, what's the best combination of time and interest rate to issue the bonds.
John, do you have a clarification?
It's really where I was picking up where Tom was just finishing his point, but it's really to provide a little bit of flexibility so that we can structure the debt, because probably familiar with yield curves differ and those markets change, and so the length that you may want to issue that bond for may change with those market conditions. And so if you structure it too tightly, you lose that flexibility to take advantage of changes in those yield curves.
And I'm just trying to be clear on this for the voters, because the way I read this from what the information, for the initial information that you gave me, is that the voters in approving this should anticipate this property tax to be levied on them for the next 20 years based on the numbers that you've put out here. But hypothetically, if you determine that it's more advantageous for the library to have a 10-year you still can't go above the 460, so how do we make those payments? Because the 10-year payments are going to be $1 million a year.
Right.
Couldn't do
So
it.
we're not collecting, so we can't do a 10-year.
Can't do it that short.
We have to do something that's long enough to make the payments at least as low as $460,000.
Right.
So we couldn't choose a 10-year, even though you said, well, we need some flexibility. We're kind of stuck with the flexibility of we have to be able to collect the money to
Fits
make the
within the
payments.
parameters that we have to put in the ballot question. Correct. So, yeah, to preserve a 10-year flexibility, as you said, we'd have to put a much bigger number in there as the annual property tax, and it's not realistic. We really, we don't plan on issuing the debt over that short of a period of time. Typically, what we're doing when we're issuing debt is we're trying to, match the life of the improvement to the time period in which we repay the debt incurred for that, so that the people who are actually getting the use of the facility over that time period are paying for it in their property taxes over that time period.
Sure, keep going.
My next question is probably for Kathy, and it refers to operation costs of this project moving forward. Here we are, we're putting a ballot question out to our voters in our democratic way to increase the size, capacity, and operations of the library fairly substantially. I would assume as a voter, and hopefully you give me more information, that there's going to be an increased cost of operating this this asset of ours, i.e. there's going to be an annuity that we have to pay out going forward to keep this going. Is this tax going to be supporting it? Are we going to be able to support this with the current budgets that we have for the library, i.e. no additional an additional tax for operations, those sorts of things? Is that a clear enough way of putting the question?
Yes, and that's why this is actually going to be two different questions on the ballot, because the answer, in short, is no. We'll need some more money, so that's what the second ballot question is. And that, we're estimating currently at $141,000 a year, and we're hoping that as we refine these numbers, that will come down too in the next 2 weeks when we come back for our second reading.
I'm sorry, what was that number?
$141,000 annually.
That's our additional expense for having this amenity.
Right. And so that number is estimated to cover cleaning contracts, utility bills, the building maintenance department from the county that comes over and works on our building, and also it includes a capital replacement schedule for this additional square footage, so that eventually if the roof needs to be replaced or when carpet needs to be redone and repainting, that money's all been built in here so that we don't build an addition and then say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't afford to operate it. Can we have more money? So we're figuring that out up front and asking for it up front. So that's the second ballot question. And that is an ongoing cost. It would not be sunsetted the way that the bond question would be.
That's it for right now. Thanks.
Rachel?
Yes, thank you. It's good to know this is the first reading, and we set the language large and the numbers large so that as they're refined, they can come down, because at first reading, you can't start small and go bigger. So that's the process. That way, I anticipate your additional work. What I would like to ask you to consider going into the next reading is, is there language similar to what Rob was asking, to say at the lowest interest rate available and not to exceed 5.5% or something like that. I mean, if that's what we're calculating, the 460 and the 10.2, isn't there a way to bracket that number for the public so they understand that, we are pursuing the lowest interest rate available, and that these numbers are calculated currently on 5.5 or 6% or whatever it is, but to get that in there, I have just think it's valuable when you have these not to exceed and lowest rate possible that we can obtain in the market. I've seen language like that before in ballot questions.
Yeah, I guess the hesitation is, in doing that, is that it adds yet another limiting parameter that isn't required by law to be in the question. And so, you start boxing yourself in as you're doing that. There is a requirement in the law that the maximum net effective interest rate, a maximum net effective interest rate be stated in the resolution that's adopting the question. And so there we put 7%. If you read the resolution, it says, it won't be more than 7%. So you could reiterate that in the question, but the law just says it needs to be in the resolution, not necessarily in the question.
At least for me, I'd like to see some potential options for that in the second reading of the language if it's possible. But it just right now, to me, it feels so very open-ended. It sounds like, we could issue it for 30 years if it goes up to 10%, but we're still going to issue, or the issue part of it. It's just, especially when people are so familiar right now with getting only 1% on their market. And so I'm thinking more of information to the voters, if there's a way to do it that does not box you in so much. Again, it's not to exceed or at the lowest rate available, but not to exceed 7%.
Rachel, that's really a question for us, not for Tom or Kathy. So I think in other words, you can't as an individual ask them, but you could ask us whether or not we agree with that. And that's how we would proceed, I think.
Yes, I agree with that, Michael. That's why I was asking if our in-house expert would be able to write it up in such a way that we as a board could make a choice at the next meeting and see it not early.
I think the initial question is, do you want the commissioners to agree with that request?
Yes. Would the commissioners agree with the request to write it up that way so we could take a look at it and see what it looks like in print at the next meeting?
So I see some thumbs up. George?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, let's go ahead with that.
So we could list a maximum term of 30 years, that's the statutory limit, and the maximum interest rate that we specified out of 7%. We can add those into the question if you want, and that's what we'll bring you at second reading. That is a version with that and the existing version.
I'm maybe getting confused by the way you've presented this, Tom, but the numbers that are in here now, you said were based on a maximum of about 6%, And so I'd like to make sure, I myself want to narrow it down. I don't want it to be so wide open that when I'm discussing this issue with people, it's too wide a range of variables of what it can be. I think that there's a point at which, for me, if we have to issue it above 6% interest, I'm not sure I'd want to support the project going forward. I don't know why and I think that bonding on a lower term, such as 20 years, is most appropriate for the community, to the extent we as a board are setting the policy for the bond question. And that's just me.
I think, Rachel, that actually is a decision that we could make.
Yeah.
And that question will come back to us, because we will be obligating the county. And I think our financial position has always been very conservative, and we wouldn't indebt ourselves at that high rate. So I think that question's covered, really, given our financial responsibility. If we limit it explicitly, we might not be able to get, I don't know, but we might not be able to get this bond at all. So I think we go with my feeling is you go with the statutory limits and you look for the best possible deal. And you don't limit yourself, at this point at least. Rob.
Can I finish, please?
Go ahead, yeah.
I'm just trying to get the type of information for the second reading that we all can look at as a board for those appropriate options. I'm not trying to suggest it has to be one way or the other, but I'd like to make the request to the appropriate staff that we have it. And my concern is simply that if you leave it too wide open with just the state statutory limits, it creates an opening for people to say they could issue bonds up to 7%. You know, why give them their approval? It's too much of a blank check. And that if that's not our intent and that's not how this is priced out, perhaps we can narrow it a touch for the actual ballot question, because if it does not pass, if it is left too open-ended and doesn't pass, it might be detrimental to the effort. And so I'd just like to look at those options at the second reading if possible.
Well, and I agree with Rachel. When the bond is issued, who has the authority to approve that?
That's this board.
So the bond would actually come back to us, and we have to approve the interest rate, the terms, the length, all of that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the issue that
I
I...
have resolution the way this is, so
Okay.
it's 2 readings, public hearing, full process.
Because the issue that I have with the ballot language is, as a voter looking at this, I don't know if I'm paying an additional tax for 10 years, 10, 20 years, 15 years, 30 years. And that's a big difference to me as a voter as to how long I'm going to be paying this tax that sunsets. And the county, or the Board of County Commissioners, is ultimately going to be the one that has the authority to set the term length of that, i.e. the collection length. And obviously the amount of the payments change too, because we might be collecting less if it's a longer period of time, or collecting more if it's a shorter period of time. But to me, you know, having control of, you know, somewhat control as a voter of my property taxes, I have control as a voter, that's what I would want to know. And having that sort of information that I think Rachel is requesting gives us a view of what we're really talking about and narrows the scope of this to a more specific.
I think you can leave it fairly broad, but have some not to exceed brackets around the edges.
Well, especially if this is based on a, whatever you said, close to 6% interest rate. Well, it gives this board the authority to say, well, whatever, we've got 6%, let's just spread it out for a few more years. And
Well, but I think, you know, my feeling about that is, I'm not so concerned about that issue, because we are the responsible parties. And not only can people vote on this ballot question, they'll be able to vote on commissioners. And so if the commissioners make unwise choices financially, the recourse for the voter is to simply get those people out of office. Now, I don't expect any unwise decisions financially from this board, and I don't think the public does either. We just had a survey returned to us, actually in the library survey, that showed a 71% approval rate of the county commissioners. So my feeling is that there's an overwhelming trust of the judgment of the commissioners, and particularly a trust, it seems to me, in financial matters. So we've just been challenged by one of the greatest financial disasters since the Great Depression, and this county has come through well. I mean, really well. And the voters are grateful for that. So I think this debate over 0.5% of interest rate it's interesting, but it's not quite necessary, since there is state statute limitations. George?
Well, I think we've agreed that we'll have an option to come back to us. So I think we can move on from that, unless the other option, of course, is to raise our book fines, our late fees. That's about.
Make it several thousand.
Tom, in terms of the process for going for bond counsel and timing, when does that, I'm sure you're already working with bond counsel now, but how does that process work in the timing? And when do we actually lock something in? Do we have to wait till after second reading for this to move forward, or how's that process work?
Oh, after the vote.
Yeah.
You wait till after the vote, actually.
Yeah, you have to have an affirmative vote, and then we would look at the timing of the project, you know, when is the cash actually going to be needed. As we said, we already have half of the cost of the project available in the library fund right now, so theoretically, you could spend that down first, then issue the bonds, at the last minute that you actually need the cash. Alternatively, you could get what I'd envision doing is we would go out to bid on the project, get a firm cost so that we know what we're dealing with, allow for some contingency with respect to that, know how much the library has available, then size the bond issue, and proceed to issue the bonds, towards the beginning of the construction project.
And so, because of that process and having to go through this first you have to go through an election, then you have to go through actually a proposal for a bid for a contractor. So that's why I'm guessing you're suggesting we want to keep this ballot question a little more flexible instead of locking that in, because we have too many unknowns this early in the stage in August versus what may happen after November.
Yeah, we probably would not be issuing these bonds before a year from now.
Yeah, okay.
Most likely.
Any further questions? Yes, Rob.
So you said it's about $16, $17 per residential property value. What's the commercial property value tax levy?
Commercially, it is $62 per million. And that's $1 million market value, not assessed.
Yes, Chad?
Yeah, first I'd like to start out by expressing my appreciation for staff and the library board taking on the challenge of allowing us to have the best library possible. And though I'm not really a fan of the canopy, and I am very concerned about the energy loss with all the glass, those are not the reasons why I have a certain position on this, which I will express at this time. And I have communicated with Kathy respectfully about totally being transparent about where I'm at, and I think the community knows where I'm at, but I will repeat that in short. I'm not going to support the library expansion being on the ballot at this time. For me, timing is everything in life. I don't care what. Timing is everything. We've gone through, as the commissioner alluded to, the toughest economic times since the Great Depression. For many people in this community, they haven't gotten past that. Many people are suffering greatly. And my sensitivity is for everyone, regardless of what their economic level is. But I think in good times you go to the voters, and in tough times you don't. Very clear. Yesterday we had a work session with the Aspen Education Foundation, and at that time I presented some numbers about where our workforce is at in those relative to unemployment. And those numbers were like in 05, I think it was about 2.2%, 2.7% the next year. Well, by the time we got to 08 or 9, and I don't have those numbers in front of me because I had like 7 years of numbers, we're at 7.7, currently at 8.3. Times are tough. And so, though I am an absolute supporter of the library, I'm just not supporting this timing of this ballot question. And this goes back to my approach to bonding questions, mill levy questions. Even in 08, I did not support the board's direction to put the mill levy for the road question on the ballot. I don't think things have improved that greatly unless you look at Wall Street. Even as we read, I think it was yesterday in the paper, a report about the real estate element of our community. Well, sure, the $5 million properties are starting to heat up and going, but the little guy's having a tough time. Those properties are not selling. And guess who is foreclosed on or goes through short sales? The little guys. So I'm taking a bit of a tough position here. I respect what's going on here, but I will also respectfully not support it.
Yes, Rob?
One of the concerns that I have is, I think the public view on this ballot question has come down to a lot per our poll on design and whether or not this is the library they want and whether or not this is the construction that they want, whether or not this is the right expansion for these dollars and that sort of stuff. You know, we spent, or the library spent, $10,000 or so conducting that poll. I think it was a significant statistical analysis of the public. It started at 51% in favor of it, and after giving some information out there, I think it jumped to 57%, 59%. You know, and I'll be honest, as a voter, I'm kind of torn on this ballot question for the same reasons that Jack put out there. Specifically, the increased cost of $141,000 a year going forward to operate this, in addition to a tax levy at a time period where we're still kind of coming out of a recession, because I do think those do have large economic impacts to the environment, our economic sustainability here as a community, whether we are able to. It's easy to say this costs a couple cups of coffee a year, but it's hard to see the effects on that on a community, whether it's businesses, the employment rate, those sorts of things. I do think that my job as a commissioner is to to try to represent the public and go out and try to feel what the public wants. And I think this election will show us that. As a voter, I'll be honest, right now, I don't think I'm going to support this this question when it comes up and I vote in November. But as a commissioner, I'm going to support it as being on the ballot. I think I'm kind of on the fence there. So things may change in the next 2 months in terms of how I cast my vote in November in terms of this. But I do think that the tax issue is an issue for the electric public out there, and I support moving forward with this in first reading.
George?
And I guess that's, just to piggyback off of Rob, I guess that's the beauty of a democratic process. We're here today to make a decision whether we want to authorize this moving forward at first reading, and then let the voters decide. And I'm sure the library board knows the issues and the challenges ahead, whether it be the issue of taxes or the issue of design, but that's something that the library board, I think, is geared up to address and answer those questions. So with that, I will support this, and if you're ready for a motion, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, since everybody's making statements, I think I'll make one too, avail myself of making a statement. Jack alluded to tough times and the difficulty that people are facing. And one way that people face difficult times is to go to the library. And they go to the library because they can withdraw a book there for free. There's no cost. And it's a way of a community of sharing its accumulated wealth with everyone, with people who are indigent to people who are very wealthy. And it's an expression of the values of a community when you have a library such as ours, it seems to me. And so it's a refuge for children who don't have parents after school, but have a place they can go, study, entertain themselves. And it's a place for the community to take pride in. It's a place for the community to donate money to. I mean, I wish people would donate $1 million to the commissioners, but they haven't. But they have donated $1 million to the library. That's a really significant cultural institution. And there has been debate about the structure of the library. And these debates happen often because it turns out that everybody is an architect. But on top of that, everybody is a reader. We should take pride in that. And the foundation of that process of reading and learning occurs at a library. And so, in tough times and good times, you need to support your library. And I take a great deal of pride in our library, and I intend on supporting it unequivocally, now and into the future. Because the issue is, what kind of pride can you take in your community? And if a community turns down a library that's been thoughtfully planned out, that's a very tough decision on the part of the community. For me, it means the end of the kind of community we have now. So, because I can remember when the library was in the Wheeler Opera House, and just a few books. It was on Main Street. Now it's on Mill Street. It's an amazing evolution, and we should take pride in that evolution. So, I'm going to support it. Yes, Rachel.
Michael, it's hard to follow you when you speak so eloquently, but I would make a few points. On my way to the meeting today, I was doing a little running around. I have some errands to take care of, and was coming down Mill Street and stopped for all the little preschoolers in the crosswalk coming over from the Yellow Brick to go to the library. It's a resource that's used vigorously by our young folks, our extremely young folks. And my next door neighbor son is reading, I think, about 2 or 3 levels above grade level right now. And I know his mother and father diligently took him to story hour at the library early on. And these sort of experiences are what opens up the world of knowledge to our young people. It's a resource for many, whether you're filling in an employment application online or searching for jobs online or things like that and don't have a home base at that point. So I think we could all expound on the many uses and benefits of the library. I know the big challenge everyone has to find any sort of community meeting space. Nonprofit groups benefit by having a place to host gatherings, and you're booked pretty far in advance, and I know most of the other available rooms are. And we've lost rooms like that when we lost the Gibbons, and we've lost other centers of community gathering. But I was trying to recall the rest of the quote. Maybe I'll find it for the second meeting. But there is always chance for hesitancy. There's always a reason to pull back. And people who would like to pull back can always find that. And those who would like to move forward with investments in ourselves have that chance as well. And as others have alluded to, that's the democratic process. That's why this should be on the ballot. But I think that the investments we have made in ourselves via taxes have created the greatest property values and community values here that as much as anywhere else in the country. And you can go long and far to look at what those investments have been, whether they've been open space and trails, whether they've been mass transit, whether they've been affordable housing, whether they've been the Aspen Recreation Center. And it has created an environment that is not only great for our community, but has been great for our tourists. It has been great for our guests. And I know that when my brother comes out to visit and ski, he always makes a trip to the library. He just says he loves being able to see what we are doing in our library. And I think that it's important for our guests who are world-class travelers, who are international in nature, to see that our library is modern and current and going forward. So this isn't about the library of 2005. This is about the library of 2015 and 2025. And this will enable us to embrace the future and move into that. I think it's also important to note that as much as it's bad times, difficult times, it is our opportunity to get the lowest interest rates possible for this investment and the lowest construction costs possible for this investment. So by pulling back and saying, well, maybe 2 years would be better or 4 years from now would be better, we could be sitting here talking about an interest rate range from 6 to 9%. Or we could be talking about construction bids that would be significantly higher. I think we know that from every bid that we've put out on our trail work and our own road work, that we are seeing the best possible construction prices now. And so moving forward now is the way to save the taxpayer monies while making an investment that support community property values overall. So that's why I will be unequivocally supporting this question as well.
George, you wanted to make a motion?
I guess we do these one at a time. So the first one would be a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, submitting to the electorate at the election to be held on November 6, 2012, a question authorizing the issuance of a general obligation debt in the amount up to $5.4 million for the purpose of renovating, expanding, and improving the Pickens County Library.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Respectfully opposed.
Is there a motion for the second resolution?
I'll make that motion again. A resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, submitting to the electorate at the election to be held on November 6, 2012, a question regarding a property tax increase for the Pickens County Library.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Respectfully opposed.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Library Board.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Or less than that. See you in 13 days.
Now we have a resolution authorizing renewable energy mitigation program funding request. Cindy Hubin is going to lead that discussion. Is that right, Cindy?
Yes, and I have Mona and Jason from CORE with us today, in case you have any specific questions.
Mona Newton
And Jason
Haber
are here for any of the specific questions you might have. First of all, I'd like to do a housekeeping measure. This resolution doesn't contain all of the signature blanks that it needs. This is actually a first and a second reading. Today is the first reading. Second reading and public hearing is set for August 21st. So the content of the resolution is the same, but I'd like the public to know that there is a public hearing on this resolution on August 21st.
Okay, so are there any other items you want to cover for us?
That's it, unless you'd like to know, we had quite an extensive work session just a couple weeks ago to discuss the REMP funds, and we also have a follow-up meeting that you had requested, and we go over some of the operations of CORE and specifically the review of those REMP funds, and we've set that for October 2nd. That'll be after another meeting with the CORE Board of Directors.
Any questions for Cindy or Mona or Jason? Yes, Jack?
I have a question. I think about the valley because we do distribute funds throughout the valley. What is the status of Alice Hubbard's group? And right now I've been trying to pull the name of it off the top of my head.
Clear.
What is the status of that organization relative to giving out grants such as these or rebates, etc.?
I'll let Mona answer that.
Sure. They have had some funding through various grants programs, the Department of Local Affairs, and they've completed that round. Right now, they're seeking funding from the GCE board, yes, the Garfield Clean Energy Board. In fact, I think they're meeting today to fund programs throughout Garfield County in the coming year. Their rebates are probably they probably run out of everything as far as I understand. There may be some available, but not much.
The programs, the rebates that are available are through the town of Glenwood Springs at this point. So I don't believe that they actually have any rebates available, and they don't have any grant funds available right now for communities or programs such as this. They are providing some technical assistance to the town of Carbondale and to other towns within Garfield County per their contracts with them.
And further clarification. So certainly I'm fully aware that the grant process is valley-wide. Is our rebate, as far as this mitigation program, the rent fund, is that valley-wide, the rebates? And how far, does it go into the Grand Valley, as it were?
No, sir. It goes as far as Glenwood Springs.
Yeah, Glenwood, okay.
And I will say, I had a conversation with her this week about if, and I don't believe that rebates are on the table for this year, but if they would have rebates, we'd have to have that conversation. And I mentioned that we were having the conversation with you this morning about, the REMP approving this resolution, and should that change, we would have a conversation and come back to you potentially with a modification. So.
Good. Thanks for that.
Any other questions? Yes, Rob.
Just a quick comment. And I think when we went through this last year, this comment was also brought up that it would be nice to maybe schedule now for the beginning of next summer that we get a follow-up on some of these projects, because I don't think we get to see some of the praises that are happening out there with what's gone on with this money. And I know we did some money for a docking station for a car for the city last time around. I don't know where that project is, and some other projects were really interesting, but we just don't hear about them afterwards. So I'd really like to get, before we do our grant process again next year, I'd like to get some follow-up on how these projects are successful, hopefully, super successful, hopefully.
Absolutely, and one of the requests also was made by that same request was made by the core board, and so we will provide them with an analysis, not at the September board meeting, but at the January board meeting, because we want to have a full year analysis of savings and successes and challenges and how to go forward. So we'd be happy to come back in the January, February time frame to you as well and share that information with you. Because I agree, I think there's a lot of good information that we should really be sharing more so.
That would be wonderful.
Chad?
Yeah, along those lines, I'm wondering, does the core board have a formal process to measure outcomes? For example, our Healthy Community Fund and the grant process and all the work they do, they have an outcomes, part of the process. Does the core board have a way to weigh the results of what Rob's asking for?
Well, as part of our...
Other than kilowatts, I mean, that's, doesn't tell a lot, except, there's a bunch here, or a real big bunch here, Excuse me for being so simple.
It's okay. I appreciate that. We haven't per se, and I should probably let Jason do more of that, since I don't know how much longer I can really claim the new person on the block here, but I'm 2 months into it. So, but Jason has been through the process. So.
Well, I would just say the grant agreements that we sign with every awardee requires the Corps has access to 2 years of utility bills prior to awarding grants and 2 years after. So we're able to measure the kilowatt hour savings. If you're talking about broader outcomes,
how does this project, for example, Aspen Tree, for example, how does that fit in the scope of things of the greater community? Is there, this is a great, fabulous, groundbreaking, I don't mean to be facetious here, but, with what it is and the dome, et cetera, the potential. Well, is there a way to measure, and I really think it's a discussion because I know it doesn't exist, the community benefit, you know. We all understand kilowatt hours and carbon footprint, and I'm not saying about formulas, but, you know, the effect, the intent. So I guess as an individual commissioner, I would like the core board maybe to at least consider, well, you know, you can get this cut and dried stuff, but there's another component, you know, outcomes, of outcomes.
I think when we go to this next core board meeting, we can certainly talk about how you might put context to that concept of community benefit. Maybe it's other organizations that are touched by this, or people in need, or some other way that demonstrates community benefit of a particular investment in a grant.
Yeah, and I infer from the Healthy Community Fund and that grant process and outcomes, that doesn't just say, well, we served X number of people. There are other components of that analysis feedback. So, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying try to model something, only the point is outcomes. Because this is quite different. Thank you.
Any further questions?
You ready for a motion, Michael?
Yeah, I'll just make a statement. I'm not going to support this grant thing. You know, and this has been consistent with me. I've supported in the past and not supported at times. But the problem I have with just a general rent program is that it was supposed to be a self-limiting program, and that the imposition of penalties on people who were putting in heated driveways and heated pools, and the idea was if you charged them something, that it would be self-limiting. And the fact of the matter is that part of the rent program has failed because people simply use this method of an in lieu payment, essentially, to continue that kind of excessive energy use. And so I think Pickens County has to think harder about this issue and address it in the building codes, because it's just not working. And it's setting up a fund for various things like a greenhouse or controls, but there's even a loss of energy in that, because really you shouldn't be spending that energy in the first place. And so that's been a problem all along with this. Now, so it's been in existence for 12 years. Is that how long it's been in existence? And it hasn't changed. We still have money coming in because we still afford the opportunity for people to waste energy. And our building codes need to be adjusted so people don't waste energy. They aren't extravagant with their energy use. They don't heat the outdoors. They don't heat their pools with means other than the sun or geothermal. And I just, unless I don't support this, I don't think there's going to be a change. And I'm really anxious for a change here. On top of that, these grants historically have been all over the place. And there's no, I mean, the unifying theme of these grants has been, it makes me feel good. And I just don't think there's any rigorous kind of application of a grant standard to these grants. I wish it was more rigorous. It isn't rigorous enough. Our energy code isn't rigorous enough. And if we continue to support it as is, we'll continue to have this go on. So I'm not going to support it. Everybody wants to make comments. Rachel?
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll have a chance for comments on second reading too. You know, I think that your comments, Michael, especially the first part, are truly more directed to our board about should we examine our energy codes and should we tighten those up. That board is just administering this fund for us. They're not responsible for our energy codes or any of our sentiments about energy waste or things like that. So I think that is certainly a discussion our board should take up. Core has simply been administering for us, and I think that over the years we have seen reports back, and if we want more thorough reports back about the carbon reductions, the energy efficiencies, the avoided energy use, the educational efforts that have gone on, then we should see those. But I'm very comfortable with the outcomes that have been produced. I think that in many ways, when you look at this going back to 2000 when it was first implemented, or prior to 2000, that's what I believe. I think I was mayor of Aspen at the time. It's been a groundbreaking effort. It's been literally an ice-breaking effort in the Arctic to say, how do we begin to reduce our energy consumption? How do we begin to get this awareness in the public about the energy they use, or that they could both save money and be environmental stewards in their actions in their home? And by having this fund, we have seen any number of individuals make those steps forward. It's been a collective community march forward towards greater goals. So I'm satisfied with this. If we would like to have a work session with CORE about creating more vigorous standards to narrow the scope of how those energy reductions occur, again, I'm wide open to doing that as a board. That would be fine. I think that the process has been improved consistently. I think these are solid grants. There's some that I'm more favorable of than others, but I'm not going to pull any individual ones out. It's a smaller grant year, clearly. And the last thing is that perhaps, Cindy, I don't know if there'd be time before a second reading or not, but to look through the building department records and give us a little bit of a synopsis of the number of buildings that have found ways and did not pay a mitigation fee because they chose to put the energy-saving measures into their buildings. And, you know, maybe we're just looking at the dollar amounts generated by those who are paying in lieu, and we're not looking at the structural changes that have occurred with new construction that have chosen to integrate more energy efficiencies in their process. So I feel like we're only seeing one side of the coin when we do the grant process. So let's take a look at how it's been, and that would certainly be necessary to any review of tightening our energy codes anyhow. Thank you.
George.
Yeah, this is these dollars come from a mitigation, and that mitigation is similar to mitigation we get from to our housing program based on if someone's going to build an employee unit or not. And we can have that discussion as well. You know, should we be allowing 15,000 square foot homes when we talk about energy and greenhouse emissions and carbon? I mean, that ties into this whole discussion. But I think the rent program, as it is, does provide an opportunity to further educate the community, further educate property owners, to let them know there are other options, there are other ways to be green, to save energy. And I think Rachel's suggestion is great to look at some of those. I know last year we went through an extensive rewrite of our solar code, and specifically to help address homeowners' concerns and needs and to encourage them to develop on-site solar. So I think it's an evolving process. I think they're two separate issues. But this issue, as Rachel mentioned, this is really just an administrative process that CORE does for the community, which is great. And at this point, I support this moving forward.
Jack?
Yeah, we look at the world around us. Let's just look at Western civilization because it's easier. Yeah, we don't live in an ideal world, and we face huge challenges. But I wonder if one of the jobs of the Pickens County Commissioners is actually to affect lifestyle changes and social change to the degree where we dictate what you can and can't have on all levels. Now, we have one of the toughest codes, let's just say in the state, land use codes. We work very hard to protect the environment, to make sure that we mitigate impacts, etc. For me, I'm not willing to go so far as to totally say, no, you can't have a hot tub, or no, you can't have a heated driveway, whether it's flat or like some of the driveways I manage, very steep. Then going to this process, CORE and the rent program, I think we have done as commissioners, and the evolution of this program has really made leaps and bounds great progress in refining, understanding, and coming up with and supporting really great projects. I couldn't stress the education piece more, but also the ability of some organizations to do things they couldn't do. And so, for me, I have to weigh, carbon footprint, certainly am concerned about that. But okay, I'm not going to dictate to what your lifestyle is totally, and is there a real benefit? I'm sure this is legally sustainable. That's an important component. So I totally support this. If we can make it better year after year, let's keep doing it. And whenever there is the determination by the chair we can have a motion, I would like to do that.
Rachel, did you want to make a comment?
Kind of following on, I think, on what Jack has said, I think there also is a parallel with our transferable development right program. It doesn't eliminate growth, it moves it to a more appropriate location. It's never been meant to eliminate itself because we were ever able to zone away all of the development in areas where we didn't want it. We have found appropriate ways to move it. And I think the term has been used before that it creates what we call a transactional marketplace. And that's why it's accepted by the public, because people can transact to obtain, as Jack has put it, the lifestyle choices they really want, and yet offset their energy elsewhere, as opposed to a hard and fast rule to say you cannot have this as part of your lifestyle. And again, the bigger question George has raised or Jack has raised, are house sizes appropriate? It's a big issue, and perhaps one we as a board should embark on, but that's not CORE's bailiwick.
Is there a motion?
I'd like to move to approve a resolution of the Pitkin County Board of County Commissioners authorizing spending funds generated through the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
One opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good talk.
Surprised me too.
Jason Honey's for you last night.
Item number 3
Okay, just added.
is a resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with Eagle County for child and adult protection agreement. Nan Sundin is here to present this to us. So do you have an agreement hammered out with Eagle County?
We do, Lydia, do you have copies of the IGA? So, I'm Nan Sundin, Health and Human Services Director. This is Kim Dubois, the Adult and Family Services Manager. And first, apologies that the IGA that we put in your packet was not the most up-to-date version that included Eagle County's edits.
We got that by email last
So I
night.
know you got that by email, and that's what Lindy is passing out right now, is the edited version. So as you all know, this is an agreement that we've been working on between Pitkin County Human Services and Eagle County Human Services for Pitkin to take on the Elgibel and Basalt Child Welfare and Adult Protective Services. And we've, a couple of things so that you know, we have in this document a description of the services that we would perform around child welfare and adult protection, the services that Eagle would perform that include some in-kind donations as well as paying the fee that we would charge, And then in this document, we have changed the, for example, the termination clause from 180 days, which is standard and is in our public assistance IGA, to a 60-day termination option at your request. And we also have in here two pieces that I'd like to just bring up. A lot of the IGA that you see is standard language that we use in all of our IGAs. But in this IGA, it talks about a 3-year term, but it also, some of Eagle's language talks about a term from September 1st to August 31st. I would just like to propose that we call the term for 3 years and that it technically start in 2013 and we prorate the fee for the next 4 months. And we use that language. We did that when we initially started with the IGA for public assistance, and we counted the term from the next fiscal year. I think that's simpler, and otherwise it kind of reads kind of kooky. We also, it was requested that we get information about whether or not Eagle County has had any claims against them in human services in the last 5 years in eligible. And in fact, they've not had any claims throughout Eagle County, just as we have never had any claims. So I wanted to make sure that you have that information. And we know that under the termination of agreement, which is number 5, page 5 of the IGA, the last sentence is reads kind of funny too. And it basically is saying that I think what it's trying to say is that Pitkin will administer the court cases that they have, even though they are terminating the contract. And we know that John Ely has some concerns about that. We would maybe recommend that we put in some language that says that we will negotiate with Eagle County for the transfer of cases so that it will be in the best interest of children and families. Because we know that it's actually in the transfer of cases, especially court cases, that families can really lose momentum. And we wouldn't want to just, if we're going to terminate, just cut off a court case that we're involved with, just like we're asking Eagle to hold on to their court cases as they transfer the cases to us. So that would be a recommendation that we make. And otherwise, I would just leave it up to you all to ask questions. And do you want to add anything? Or
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay. John, do you have anything you want to add?
In regards to that paragraph 5 that Dan was just talking about, I'm not, this is the first time I've heard of that suggested language. I'm not exactly sure that I'm in agreement with that. I think best practices is to not specify anything beyond the 60 days after cancellation. The justification for putting 60 days as opposed to a longer time period is basically a recognition of a heightened potential liability for this type of activity, even though both parties to the agreement have never experienced any actual claims made upon them. I would think that the anticipation going into this type of an IGA is that it, quite frankly, will not be terminated. That will probably go well into the future, and that if there is cause for termination, that means that all the wheels have come off the wagon and that there must be a dire circumstance. And in that case, the transfer of cases should be immediate. And at the time, if that happens, as Dan said, I think that both parties can sit down and try to accommodate the needs of any families that are being, have cases that are being administered, but to not make it firm, kind of within the construct of the IGA, leaves it a termination of Eagle County's obligations under the IGA, including payment, where there's a potential continuation of our obligation under the IGA without knowing how many cases might be active or the duration that's at least expected. In some cases, go on for quite a number of years. So I guess my recommendation would be to delete that last sentence of paragraph 5 and leave the parties the latitude to recognize that the parties will have the latitude in the future to provide for the transitional care of families that are being supervised through a DNN or other procedure.
I think Eagle will be amenable to that.
And you're amenable to it.
And we're amenable to that.
Any questions for Nan or Kim? Yes, Jack.
Now, Nan, I'm wondering, under, in the newly handed out, paragraph 2, that's on page 3, Eagle's obligations and authority. Do we need to refer to Exhibit A? I have to say I didn't see a, oh, here it is, G, as set forth in Exhibit A. So, sorry, I didn't gather all that in. Okay, so what I'm understanding, what John's recommendation is paragraph 5, we really delete the last sentence, the second sentence, and wherever the dates are articulated in this document, for example, paragraph 3, it's there twice, as well as the Exhibit A. Those dates will change from January 1st, 2013 to December 31st, 2015, 13, 14, or is it
It would
15?
read that the budget for January 1st, 2013 to December 31st, 2013. So the budget is only set each year, but the term of the agreement is 3 years.
Okay, so I guess the best way to say is by second, does this take a second reading?
This is the first reading, and it is set for second reading.
And so we'll clean up.
We will clean up that language and just ask them to pay a prorated share of the 2013 budget.
And does that have to be articulated in the document about the prorated?
I think we would need to clarify
okay.
that, yeah.
Any further questions for Nan or Kim? Is there a motion? Jack?
I'd like to move to approve a resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with the Board of County Commissioners of Eagle County for the provision of child and adult protection services as amended as we talked earlier.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Dan, Kim, thank you very much. I know this has been terrifically hard work, and you've done a great job.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much. Exciting.
The next item is consent public hearings. We have a special event liquor license for the Aspen Valley Land Trust. Lindy Dean is sitting in front of us. That's a special treat. Thank you, Lindy.
You're welcome. Lindy Dean, Deputy Clerk in the Clerk and Recorder's Office. With me is Melissa Sumera, who is the event manager for the Aspen Valley Land Trust Special Event Liquor License application. Aspen Valley Land Trust will be holding their annual fundraiser on September 8th. And she is here to get approval for a special event liquor license.
Are there any questions? Yes, Rachel.
Can you let us know when and where the event is for the television cameras and how people get tickets?
Sure. This is the 9th annual event. It's being held for the 4th year at the Tybar Ranch on Prince Creek Road, just outside of Carbondale. It will be September 8th, starts at 5:30. The event is the Save the Land Dance. It's a barn dance, silent auction. It's our main fundraising event of the year. And more information, tickets are available on our website, avlt.org. We're still looking for silent auction items, volunteers. Those people can get in touch with me if anyone is interested at the office or at avlt@avlt.org.
Super. I was able to attend last year, and it really is a fabulous event. I'd like to compliment you on that. I'll be out of town this year, but wish you all the success with it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Let me ask the board a question. You know, our last session, we approved a 5-year special events permit essentially for sustainable settings. Should we consider doing that for events that are reoccurring events like Aspen Valley Land Trust?
I don't think you can for a liquor license.
Not for a liquor license, I'm just
This one
talking
does
about...
have a 3-year.
The special events has a 3-year
Yes, they,
term?
in 2011, Community Development did grant them a 3-year permit for their special event. They will have to come each year to get a liquor license permit, but they don't have to apply for a special event permit again until 2015.
Okay, so that was done administratively, and the reason Sustainable Settings came into us is because ComDed thought we had a special interest in that particular site and that process.
An amendment to their master plan.
Right, right, okay, well, good. I'm glad we had the good judgment to do that. Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the special event liquor license application for the Aspen Valley Land Trust.
Second?
Second. Public
Lydia, are you taking the notes at the same time you have?
Thank God for the report.
It is a public hearing?
It is.
Are there members of the public who wish to make a comment on the liquor license for the Aspen Valley Land Trust? Yes, young man.
Thank you, Commissioner Owsley. My name is Dale Wilt, and I'm a resident of the town of Carbondale, and also your open space director. I want to note that the Aspen Valley Land Trust has been one of the primary partners of Pitkin County Open Space and all the things that we seek to do. And I reiterate what Commissioner Rachel said about this event, which is that it's quite a fun event to attend. And we also like the streaming slideshow they always do of conserved lands, which does also include several properties where we have partnered with the Land Trust. So I would commend this to everyone.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion, and I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for great success.
The next item is item number 6. No, I'm sorry. Is item number 5. It's a resolution approving 2 intergovernmental agreements with the State Board of the Great Outdoors Colorado Trust Fund and with the Salt and Eagle County relating to the funding of the Salt and Stall open space purchase. And Dale Will is going to present this issue to us. Dale?
Thank you, Michael. And I can project a map if you'd like, although we've seen it before and several different occasions having to do with the same project.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to do this. It's interesting, this Salt and Stall approval, I've gotten more comments on this, I think, than almost any other item. So I think it's worthwhile that there's, what I'm saying is there's a lot of public interest in this.
Great. Take this in a second.
Once it's cold, then I'll pull it up.
I might have to toggle it down a little bit. There we go. Well, while we are getting our audiovisual system booted up, there are several unusual features that are notable, I might say, about this project. It really kind of takes our collaboration on regional land conservation to a new level. We have been partnering with the town of the Salt and Eagle County on a series of acquisitions that have straddled the border of the 2 counties. As a lot of folks know, the Roaring Fork watershed is interesting, and we have a nice map from the Roaring Fork Conservancy on the wall over here. But although it includes portions of 4 different counties, it only includes 2 county seats, meaning that 2 of the 4 counties that
have portions of their land jurisdiction in our watershed actually don't have county seats in the watershed. And Eagle County is one of those counties where the county seat and the sort of day-to-day seen by the folks in the head of the county there is outside of our watershed. And what we've benefited from, nevertheless, though, is that Eagle County's voters passed an open space tax in 2004, and we have then benefited from the partnership. No, not that one. That one will be next. And as we get the map up, you can see that this particular property lies wholly in Eagle County, although just barely. And to some extent, the preservation, ironically enough, in this area is as significant, I think, to the residents of Pitkin County as it might be to the residents of the Eagle Valley, where their county seat is. So in trying to conserve the watershed as a whole, what we've done is reached out to Eagle County and also the town of Basalt. And by the way, the town of Basalt's boundaries follow up the Willits corridor and include the city market over there in this area here. So we've got 3 political jurisdictions, one of which includes this property barely, but 2 of which are quite close to it as the crow flies. And all 3 of them have come together to pool their open space dollars. And in addition, the state of Colorado, through Great Outdoors Colorado, is making a contribution. So to that extent, I think it's one of the best multi-party intergovernmental partnerships that we've put together to date. Typically, if we have big partners in projects, that it might include 1 or maybe 2, but this project includes 4 big partners, and not to leave out the Mid-Valley Trails Committee, which is also dedicating 100% of an annual year's funding allocation that it has to this project. In prior meetings, we've talked about a lot of the details of the contract that Pitkin County holds with Andrew Saltonstall for purchasing the property. Briefly, the property we are to acquire is outlined or shaded in yellow, with the exception of a 6-acre piece that sits right here that will be retained by the seller. Not shown on this map, and I apologize, but there's also a conservation easement on a separate river parcel that Mr. Saltonstall owns, and that will protect the riparian corridor across from Crown Mountain Park and protect a nice reach of the Roaring Fork Riverbank. That conservation easement does not include public access, and there's been some confusion about that. Going back to the main part of this purchase, the land outlined or shaded in yellow is about 153 acres. Mr. Saltonstall keeps approximately 6 acres, so what the governmental partnership acquires in this is about 146 acres. The property has 2 big characteristics that drew our attention to it, which are it has about 50 acres of prime irrigated land that's part of the larger agricultural scene in Emma. Emma was probably rivaled only by the lands in the immediate vicinity of Carbondale as being some of the most fertile agricultural farms that went into production early in the last century. We had famous statewide potato harvests in this valley. There was a time period when more potatoes left the Roaring Fork Valley than were grown in the entire state of Idaho, and many of those potatoes were coming off of this belt of agricultural land here. So that agricultural resource drew our attention to this, as well as the approximately 90 acres of uplands on the Crown. Now currently, when you're looking at the Crown from the viewshed of Highway 82 or up on Missouri Heights, the highest residence that has kind of
lapped itself up onto the foot of the crown, sits right about here. The crown in some ways is kind of like Smuggler Mountain. It's got residential development that's sort of landed at its feet, and what we're hoping to do is prevent residential development reaching any further up the slopes than is currently there now. There's a parcel Pitkin County acquired years ago that sits just off of the south side of this map called the bracket parcel that would have put a house right up on the ridge line there. We prevented that. You can see that the distance from Pitkin County to the southern boundary of Saltonstall is about 1,000 feet. So I think in terms of measuring the public's interest here, the public in Pitkin County has a very high interest, almost comparable to the public of Eagle County. And that I think justifies the partnership that we have here. The uplands here is about 90 acres. It's mapped as critical winter habitat for mule deer and elk by the Division of Wildlife, and of course Commissioner Newman has been representing us in discussions with the BLM about the need for a sub-area plan, seasonal closures, and we are in communication with John Groves at the Division of Parks and Wildlife and agree with the request of the division about how this property might be managed and how the Crown overall should be managed to protect that winter habitat. In addition to preventing development up on this reach, the property does connect both the Rio Grande Trail and Hooksburg Road to the federal lands on the Crown and does afford a potential recreational linkage for that piece as well. And that's one where the management planning process that Open Space is getting fairly accustomed to doing with citizen input will be paramount in determining the appropriate level of public access through there with seasonality and so on. The resolution I have in front of you specifically is to authorize agreements on the one hand with Great Outdoors Colorado for their $600,000 contribution, and on the other hand with Eagle and Basalt in a three-way IGA that would tie everyone together and set us up to go to our closing on this project.
Thank you, Dale. That was excellent. Any questions for Dale? Yes, Rob.
Quick little weird one. What is this little cutout on the map here that's on our map too? It looks like there's a trail that's not included in this property, a road or something. It's not included in this property, this little tail.
Well,
here, and it's clear in our maps.
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to. That's a great story, and our state is burdened by a state statute, SB 35, that allows 35-acre parcels to be created with very interesting shapes. And this map is of a coarse enough scale that it's hard to make out. But the adjoining landowner, the Greg and Billy Irwin, who, by the way, were here at first reading on our ordinance to do this purchase, and they do support this acquisition, their parcel includes a tiny little cherry stem that reaches down the western boundary just inside and includes a little balloon that's...
Sorry, I can't see the pointer.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
the pointer is fading on me.
Oh, okay.
So there's a little cherry stem that's owned by the adjacent owner, but it comes down and it has a little balloon in this area right here. So to that extent, this map...
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
I think your finger might be over the...
Your finger is over the front.
Oh.
There you go.
No,
No, it's still dying.
it's...
Dale.
Thank you, Jack. In any event, so
What does that mean, balloon?
there is a...
To make the 35 acres.
There is a...
Inside here, so there's land that's not part of the acquisition inside that?
Well, what I don't know, looking at this map, because we pulled this off of Eagle's GIS, and I'm not remembering exactly whether the big part of the tip of the Irwin's property sits here or just here, but what I do know for a fact, we're just looking at the survey upstairs, is that the Saltonstall property wholly surrounds it all the way around this boundary. So that, in other words, the property that the Irwins own does not touch the BLM anywhere. And it's functionally not useful to them. It was something that was done purely to get property down here to equal 35 acres in order to qualify for the subdivision exclusion in the state statutes. Now,
Does it affect our access to the Crown at all?
No.
Is there an issue with any of that?
There's a couple of details there, but there is enough land that we're acquiring from Saltonstall that goes all the way around it. There is an existing ranch road that goes straight up this fall line right here that does touch that property, and the Saltonstall property is benefited by an access easement over that ranch road. We believe that the public access up to the BLM boundary will really require, at least in the long term, a rerouted connection similar to what we did at Sky Mountain Park, because the gradient going straight up this fall line exceeds what you would want to have for a trail, and also the erosion control of the way these ranch roads were built is not great. So the connection of the public will likely be via a single track that will wholly avoid that cherry stem. The administrative access that we have is provided for in an easement over the cherry stem. And I am in discussion with the Irwins about all of those issues.
So in terms of our access, we're going to be building a new trail through there.
I think the public will want to have a trail that's different than the ranch road that's there now, and it will avoid that. Now, I hedged in stating that because, of course, we're not going to build anything new until we are done with the scoping process. But we do have land that is adequate for trail purposes that will be 100% owned by the three governments.
Any further questions for Dale? Yes, George.
I'll just make a comment. As Dale said, I think this is a great partnership again that Open Space has put together with our neighbors. I think when we look at Boulder Open Space program, they've really taken on a new venue in terms of purchasing ag land in Boulder County and then leasing that land back. So those lands not only stay in ag production, but also for local food production. And I think this is a great opportunity to utilize certainly the lower fields for leasing out and having local food production come out of that for the community. And along with that, of course, as Dale has said, there's the opportunity to extinguish what could have been at least five or six large home sites, protect wildlife habitat, certainly critical winter habitat, and provide the potential opportunity for a recreational access to the Crown, which is now private property. And it's interesting, one of the issues we've been looking at with the BLM in terms of the resource management plan is they've plotted out on a map a lot of the properties that they hold as public lands, but the access is not available because the public land does not reach down to a public access, so the private holdings. And so the opportunity to utilize our Open Space and Trails program to purchase private property then lends itself the opportunity to access public lands that would not normally be accessible. So that's just another benefit for that. And if you're ready, I'd love to make a motion.
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion, a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners approving 2 intergovernmental agreements with the State Board of the Great Outdoors Colorado Trust Fund and with the Salt and Eco County relating to the funding of the Saltonstall open space purchase.
there a second?
Second.
This is a public hearing.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Are there members of the public who wish to comment on this at this time? Seeing no members of the public who wish to comment, we'll close the public comment portion. And yes, Jack?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple comments. I very much support the partnership, the working with GOCO. And I very much support 2 out of the 3 goals or reasons why we support this, why we are purchasing this. Certainly, the open space element is very important, and the ability to prevent a giant subdivision relative to zoning. The ag element is very positive, and especially the potential for quote-unquote starting out, we'll call it a community garden. That's great. But I have so much concern about access to the Crown and impacting it and dumping people from this side of the valley continually onto the Crown. And I'm obviously very aware, I articulated this last time we spoke about this, that we have requested the BLM to enter into a special planning, recreational planning process. But that's a very big unknown. I mean, with their resources and their ability to do planning, that's in the future. For me, I don't like access to the Crown from here because I just think it's not a good thing when you have such a highly impacted area already. And I've expressed these concerns about access from the first time Dale brought this in a non-public venue, just to kind of give us a heads up. So I'm not going to support this purchase. I've heard numerous comments in the last 2 weeks, and as a statement about getting the management plan right, I'm today going to vote no. It's more of a principled point that this is such a big issue for me that, I very seldom have ever voted against an open space purchase. This one I'm going to because of my multiple times comments about access. I think just trails, we don't have to put trails everywhere, every property we buy. Sometimes you just might want to leave it alone. And this being a cooperative agreement with the SALT, for example, I believe there will be huge pressure to develop a trail system here linking the Crown. I don't know who you've heard from, Michael. You mentioned earlier you've heard a lot of comments on this. Well, I have too, and very few have been, and none have been positive about access, but positive about the conservation elements, certainly, and the ag.
I had actually just the opposite. They were not that great with the conservation, fine with, and no comment actually on access. Yes, Rachel.
Thank you. I'd just like to say I respect what I perceive as the caution that Jack is throwing out here about the importance of protecting the wildlife concerns. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is aware of that. We're aware of that. The BLM's aware of that. And so I can respect that. I also would just like to congratulate Dale and the Open Space Board and all the partners for perceiving the value of conserving this land. And we all know the old expression that people use frequently that when you pass the Pickens County line, things look different. And it's important sometimes to protect things just on the other side of that line so we can tell. We don't need to make it quite so stark by having development right up to the edge of that line. And this effort, along with others that have really put together the pieces of conservation of the agricultural heritage in that Basalt and Emma area, I think are just of vast significance to all of us, so thank you.
Thank you.
So there was a motion and a second. No further comments. I'll ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like you need to go anywhere. The next item is item 6 under consent public hearings, an ordinance authorizing the acquisition of the Shield O Commons parcel.
Yeah, well, this acquisition is one that the Open Space Board wanted to explore, and the proposed contract is somewhat unusual for us in that it has a pretty long inspection period on it. As we discussed at first reading, this property has had a bit of a tortured history in Pitkin County. It's got a tax lien on it. The prior owners had borrowed some money against it and didn't repay that, and that led to its present ownership as a result of a foreclosure action. It's kind of the center of a neighborhood that developed prior to the current, the modern Pitkin County Land Use Code. And so it's sort of the ultimate stepchild in terms of a piece of property. The Open Space Board had recommended we get this under contract so that we could evaluate its various attributes and then subsequent to that make a decision whether or not we want to go hard on this contract. We have until September 3rd as a county to decide whether this is something that we want to pursue to closing. There is some information in the packet that I wanted to clarify and make sure everyone understands, because at first reading I was more focused on the discussions with Shield O, and I've since had a chance to review all the documents related to the WinStar Foundation, and specifically WinStar is a property that was placed under conservation easement in 1996, and at that time the Rocky Mountain Institute had recently acquired the property and were looking forward to redeveloping an office complex down at the northern end of WinStar. The conservation easement on WinStar provides that there's public access on that property. And where I wanted to really focus the clarification today is that that access is on, quote, established roads and trails. Now, the unfortunate thing is that back in 1996, no one put together a complete inventory or map of what was considered to be established at the time. And consequently, to this date, there's a bit of uncertainty as to exactly where the public access routes within WinStar lie. The conservation easement does provide that the additional trails can be created with the at the behest of the landowner and with the consent of both Pitkin County and the Aspen Valley Land Trust. I have since first reading had a good discussion with the director of RMI about this, and everyone would seem to agree that there is an established road along the Walker Wonder Ditch, and it's not highlighted on your map, I'm sorry, but it runs right about where I'm pointing. There is much less knowledge of whether there was any established road or trail that emanated up out of the top of this. Now, I've heard differing anecdotes about it. The residents of Shield O that we've spoken with say that they have not been entering WinStar from this side. I've got one individual I talked to who said that back in the 1990s he used to be able to ride his dirt bike from the Monastery Cutoff Road, which is about here, all the way down this drainage. So at best there's going to be differing views of that access, whether there was anything established, but
the RMI director's position is that there was nothing that was established on the date of the easement, and consequently any new trail would require the landowner of Windstar to ask for it and then be supported by Pitkin County and Aspen Valley Land Trust. To compound the variables here, as everyone I think now knows, Windstar is on the market. And the Rocky Mountain Institute is looking to extract its equity from that property so that it can develop a facility, which I'm sure will be quite impressive, down in the salt. And consequently, they are not in a position to make any new commitments regarding features on the Windstar property that may or may not be attractive to the folks that may buy that from them. So they're in a holding pattern, and that affects our view of this. At first reading, the commissioners made it very clear that they want to be part of the follow-through where the county would come down to the question of whether or not it's going to exercise this contract or let this one go. And we left the question open exactly how that input would be given and whether we needed to schedule a meeting for that. I do have an open space board meeting on the 16th, and we have set a special meeting for September 30th so that the open space board can make its final call on this before the end of our free look, if you will. And I've asked John to put us on your calendar for executive sessions through the end of August so that you can do that as well. So given all that, I guess I'm really saying this is a bit of a work in progress. There is a lot of moving pieces. You also note in the packet I included the letter we received from the Shield O Association, and that letter raises as many questions as it answers. Through some mechanism, we're going to have to wrap up where we are as we reach the end of this month and decide whether to proceed. Given all that, my recommendation today is to go ahead and approve this agreement so that we then have a few more weeks to sort through those issues and to make sure that we all then understand how the commissioners will get together and focus on those things and give input under the contract as to whether or not the county wishes to proceed with this.
George?
I'm supportive in terms of giving this a few more weeks because we don't have any hard dollars down. We're not going to lose any money. But my original support was based on the assumption that this was going to provide access into the Windstar Conservation Area that we may lose, which is currently available to the public. And since the current owner, RMI, is not willing, sounds like they're not willing to provide a trail easement now, the question becomes, what will the new owner do? And I think what we've seen around the county anyway is as new owners have purchased properties that provide access to public lands, they've actually closed off those opportunities to access those public lands because, of course, they're buying these unique ranch properties for their value as privacy. And so if we're not going to be able to gain access into Windstar, that's probably going to change my support, and I suspect it may also with the Open Space and Trails Board. So anyway.
Yeah, do you think there's value to this property without access from Windstar?
There are conservation values there, and in the perfect world, what we would have sitting here today is a wildlife study of the quality of what we recently did up on Sky Mountain Park. Having lived at Windstar during the 1980s, I can tell you there's a lot of elk in there in the wintertime. The Windstar Bowl, so to speak, follows this ridgeline up around here, and it includes both a slice of this Christensen parcel as well as these two lots which incidentally were donated to Pitkin County and are not lots that are subject to the conversion prohibitions in our charter for open space. Open Space has been looking after them to the extent that they needed anything, which is very little. So this whole drainage then that WinStar sits in really includes this ridgeline that wraps around here. And although I'm not a wildlife biologist, sometimes I make comments on my own sort of suppositions about the biology. And here I would think that that whole WinStar bowl would have pretty significant winter habitat value for elk and probably mule deer. So protecting this bowl from development is probably a good thing. To that end, frankly, if, again, in the perfect world, if I could arrange the puzzle pieces the way I'd want them, we'd have the new owner of WinStar sitting with us at the table. So our contract and our ordinance would allow some creative things to be done here. The portion of this property that sits in that bowl, as well as these two lots, frankly, might need to be or could become part of WinStar and subject to those restrictions. And if there was a trail or not a trail, it would be conserved then as part of that upper bowl. Frankly, I floated that concept, and it's known to the director of Rocky Mountain Institute. The question is one of timing. Would there be time to suss something like that out and look for a partnership here, like we were just describing a minute ago, to really see this property all land on its feet and hopefully avoid development and find its highest conservation purpose. So yes, there is open space value there. I am nearly certain there is significant habitat value there as well.
Yes, Rachel.
Thank you. I have a question. Dale, we know there's a troubled history in the past of this parcel, whether it was open space for Shieldo or, now the liens put on, Canadian bank ownership. What type of title is available for us in this purchase? Or what type of title does the Canadian bank even have?
Utah Bank.
Utah Bank, okay.
Title's different in Utah. No, John, can you help us with that one?
What type of title we might...
We do.
Is it just a quitclaim deed?
No. The basics are, we required that the seller give us a title commitment from a reputable title company in the valley. We now have such a commitment from Land Title, and we have a survey. Nevertheless, there are reasons to be concerned, and John's kind of been the lead in sorting through it.
Well, at this point, moving forward in the contract and the diligence period contained in the contract and prior to the contract's full execution, we'd probably be in the position of objecting to several of the exceptions within the title insurance commitment and the quality of the survey at this point. Whether or not those can be reformed and put us into a position of comfortability, it's too difficult really to prognosticate.
But there's no clear path to a future determination that this is open space potentially belonging to all the current Shieldo lot owners as opposed to an independent parcel?
I think what you're talking about is an adverse possession claim by adjoining property owners due to use or occupancy of a portion.
No, I'm not really talking about adverse. I'm just, again, this was originally subdivided and this parcel was never marketed for sale. It was, I don't know if it was even recognized as a platted site. Obviously, its odd shape does not look like a lot that someone would have, put in their subdivision, no matter how it was done.
This was not platted in any way, shape, or form. It was done prior to the laws requiring a subdivision plat. The creation of the parcel is a function of the way Christensen wanted to divide up his asset, and it was never marketed by virtue of the fact that it has title difficulties and survey difficulties and relatively contemporaneous to the creation, in other words, the irregular shape that you see. Mr. Christensen borrowed against it and never repaid any of the loan, and so it was in a drawn-out foreclosure
process by virtue of those facts, as well as the usurious interest rate that was being charged by the Utah lender. So it definitely has a tortured past.
Yeah.
And if we were to close, we would close as the recipients of insured title conveyed to us through a special court. And we would serve it to substantiate that.
I mean, I may have been pursuing the wrong question in that, but I guess what, at a base level, I'm asking, are we potentially pursuing a purchase of something that no one could really develop anyhow, because it could be argued by the homeowners of Shieldo that this was open space that they had anticipated or was part of their original purchase, part of their original subdivision?
No, there's no anticipation that the property is some sort of de facto community open space. There may be claims in an adverse possession nature by adjoining property owners based on...
To bits and pieces of it.
That's right.
Okay.
And it would be difficult to get to the position of saying the property is undevelopable, but the expense and the time that it would take to develop it would be something that could be reflected in an ultimate acquisition cost.
Yeah, I guess in general, I'm in favor of moving forward with this. I would not look forward to, through a long process, eventually getting to constrained site TDR hearings about why we shouldn't allow development going forward there, whether it's slopes or wildlife concerns, winter habitat, and so on. It is a little bit of cleaning up an old mess from a subdivision before plats were required. But that doesn't mean it's not subject to the state's 35-acre provisions, and the eventual alighting of 3 homes on any of those high areas, I think, would be very detrimental. And I do think that, similar to comments that Jack just made on the last acquisition, sometimes there are lands that may be desirable for purchase for wildlife conservation, separate from whether a trail is ever accomplished or not. And we all know the challenges our elk herds have had and continue to have for habitat, particularly severe winter range. So I think we should move forward with this. I think it may be something to talk to the bank about extension on the due diligence time period. This may end up being too short. I think that it's not, I could be wrong, but it'd be hard for them to find a ready buyer right now, knowing the other type of challenges and title challenges they're going to have to go through. And so I think it's worth both looking for more of an extension time period so we're not under a gun for a final decision, and that potentially even looking to a lower price from the bank. If the difficulties found during the due diligence period are sufficient. So I'll leave it at that. I would like to continue working on it.
Rob? I'm just trying to figure out in my mind logistically how the calendar works out on this, because you're saying September 3rd, your meeting is August 30th, Open Space and Trails meeting. Our last meeting of the month is the 28th. I'd rather meet after the Open Space and Trails meeting to see what their determination is and findings are regarding this, for us to make a decision. The way I read this ordinance is that this requires both the decision of Open Space and Trails and the BOCC. So I'm just curious what our staff thinks about the logistics of getting information. Without getting that period extended beyond September 3rd, is this logistically how's it going to happen?
Of course, from my selfish perspective, I'd love to see a collaborative discussion of both the boards with a single direction coming out of it, and to that extent, our meeting on the 30th is a special meeting, and the topic is really reserved to squaring this away.
So can we join that special meeting and as a special meeting for us, potentially?
That would be great if you might.
The board wants to.
I don't see another option. So the
I will
question
not
is
be
what-
available, I'll be out of town by then.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Rob, but I'm still a little confused because right now, September 3rd is the date that we have our option, and we can, if we haven't have the opportunity of met prior to that, we can let that option go, and we could always renegotiate.
Well,
But if we don't let that option go, does that actually mean that we're committed with some dollars, or we still, because that's the way the contract is written?
it's not an option. It's a diligence period within a contract. And so the diligence period either has to be acted on or waived. If you don't act on it, it's waived. And by acting on it, I mean to exercise your rights contained within the provision of the contract, such that within the diligence period, you can cancel the contract. Without exercising that, the contract would not be canceled, and you would proceed to close it.
But functionally, it's the same notion. If the county does, the staff is going to need clear direction to either send them a letter saying we object based on what we've learned to the present agreement or not. So.
Rob?
And I guess, maybe this ordinance should read that if, for whatever reason, the BOCC doesn't come up with a decision before September 3rd, we are therefore advising staff to exercise our option to terminate the contract. To get out of, because you're saying if we don't act, if we do nothing now, September 4th, we're locked in. So I'm saying if by September 3rd we don't act, we're advising staff, our staff, to terminate, to not go forward to September 4th with the contract. Because I just don't know how we're going to get the timing done here with this, and if we don't for some reason, I mean, I'm committed, I'm not going to be gone the 16th, 17th, 18th. But
John, do you have a solution to this dilemma?
Not really, not at all.
Is September 3rd Labor Day?
No, that's a Monday.
But it is.
It is Labor Day.
So the contract
Monday,
has
Labor
a holiday clause, so essentially we should know that week on the 30th what we're doing.
I know it was a Monday.
I think technically we have until September 4th.
Yeah, I don't know if, I'm never comfortable going up to the brink with individuals that, have never done business with before, for example. But I was just wondering, Dale, do you have any idea about the flexibility of that particular clause in the contract, just to extend that by a few weeks, given the fact that we would, discussions,
Hey, I can go ask them. I can say either we're going to bow out or we need a little bit more time.
That seems like the solution, rather than to rearrange all our timing. I think, if I were the bank, I would, and I had somebody interested in this property, I'd be delighted. So let's try that. Is that okay with the board? Jack?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the discussion here, in no order of preference, though. Rachel's comments or questions about title. We all have lived with this parcel and know about it for a long time. So, tough challenge. I think John would, he'd weigh in and we'd be comfortable if he said, yeah, this will pass muster. So we can get past that one. And George's issue about access is a very fair question because it's one of the components of this purchase, the reasons why we might purchase it. It has some of those values why we purchase property. I'm not sure that is so important for me. I like the idea of purchasing this property for its conservation values and its open space values. Literally the wildlife, the vegetative community, and how it all links up to the ecology. Timing, right on, Rob. Thanks for having us step through that to understand, and I agree with Michael's question. I would support that. But for me, from the very beginning, why I've not been super enthusiastic about this purchase is not for its conservation values, But the problem with and I consider, I will withdraw that problem, but the challenge with the road association. The question I'd ask you, Dale, I mean, you look at this letter, and, this letter has some serious challenges in it. Starting off, automatically, the request is to add $27,000 to this purchase because of the arrears. The question would be, you're not asking for an answer now, but is that negotiable? We'll have to find out. The issue about the actual use, can we pin that down, for example, to the degree George wants to be comfortable? That's another question. I think we certainly can understand what commercial property, the commercial use on this property would be. I think we already have a policy how to deal with that. But this really is all about timing. And the question for you, Dale, that you have to be able to answer by September 3rd, can we get this pinned down with this road association? That to me is probably the biggest challenge going. I personally don't want to buy open space and then pay a bunch of road fees for people to access in an unknown number. They even say, well, it's probably not a lot of hiking use, but potentially if there was the link, the mountain bikers, hey, it might have a lot of desirability in one way or another. And these are great unknowns for me. I'm certainly going to support going forward, but we have to understand that at the end of the day, by September 3rd or the appropriate days earlier, John, I agree with you. You never wait till the curtain closes. It has to be understood that we're backing out of this contract if we do not have definitive answers to these questions. I want to work with the Road Association also, but it's a rather precedent-setting situation to pay road maintenance fees. And I remember this going back when I was in P&Z. We started that whole deal. Big challenges. So conservation might be the only thing here for Jack.
Thank you, Jack. I'm going to call Rachel and then
Yeah. Again, I go back with the original premise that Michael put forward, that we should request an extension of time under the current contract for the due diligence period so that we're not under the gun to ferret out the details on these different components. And I am very strongly in agreement with Jack that we need to have further discussions with the Shieldo Homeowners Association to discuss hold harmless contribution in terms of their road and road maintenance. I would consider a small one-time contribution to that as part of a settlement as necessary, but this is going to be of tremendous value to their neighborhood and to their community, and that they need to acknowledge that in some way, that it's an expenditure of close to over $600,000 to avoid homes that they would perhaps later find very objectionable. And so I think that point just needs to be made very loud and clear, and it's a sticking point for this board to have an ongoing contribution for a private road system in return for us preserving open space in their neighborhood. It's not a fair bargain in my mind.
Rob, can I propose the suggestion that we continue this until September 12th? Therefore, it remains in second reading, and we ask for an extension beyond September 12th, and we can approve it then. Would that be the way to move forward?
Do you have a response to that?
That particular move I wouldn't do, because the contract we have provides that the commissioners need to ratify the contract by tomorrow. So I left a day in there to find a signature.
Otherwise, we won't even have an option.
Nevertheless, we keep our due diligence out.
So then,
yes.
So then we would have to not approve this and have a new contract with the first and second reading that needs approval.
Assuming we could get back to a
agreement.
Assuming
Seller
we can,
signature.
assuming the seller will extend the, a new contract or whatever.
Or, let me ask the legal minds here, would we be able to approve a contract amended to extend the due diligence period to, September 21st or September 30th? And so you do have an approved contract, it had an amendment, and that amendment has to be taken back to the sellers, which is essentially our same request anyhow, that they extend the due diligence period. So maybe we could approve it amended.
Well, they wouldn't have to accept that.
Yeah, that's
My response to that would be, if our theory is we want to at least have the benefit of this existing agreement through the end of the inspection period that we have, the way to do it would be to approve it as is, but direct staff that unless we can magically solve all this list of stuff or get this extension, we're not likely to
Close on the contract. Okay, that's a good enough understanding for me.
Yeah.
I just don't like the terminology, we're not likely to. I would say that if it's not approved by the board by that period, we are directing staff to get us out of that contract by September 3rd. That's what I would want in there.
Clearly. Very good.
Yes, Dale.
I just had one other comment. I wanted to thank the Shielder Road Association for quickly getting a statement of their position put together, although I agree with Jack that there's a lot of work to be done in reducing this list of concerns to some kind of an agreement. They did come to the table very quickly to try to help us do this, and as a neighborhood, I have to say they have been quite welcoming to the idea of having this land protected, which is nice to see. So as far as the particulars, I agree. There's a lot of negotiation to be done there, and I also note that I gave this letter to the sellers as well, so that in terms of property disclosure to any other potential buyers of this arrears in the road fees is made known to everybody, and the sellers can take some responsibility for that as well.
Yes, John.
I have a question on the date, because as noted, September 3rd is Labor Day, and you back that up from Sunday and Saturday, the weekend. So, is September 3rd a realistic date that we can notify that we are going to, if we don't get these issues addressed, that we're going to pull out, or does staff have to look at the last day in August, which is Friday, August 31st?
I wouldn't do it any later than that day.
August 31st, right.
I wouldn't wait that long, quite frankly. I mean, we ought to know yes or no.
Well, open space is going to be on August 30th.
Yeah, and we'll know by then certainly about the extension.
About the extension.
Right.
So I'm just saying, John, you concur with me, we should be pushing that date forward. Backwards.
I would expect a letter to emanate from the county offices probably by the end of the day on the 30th, if not before. On this, open space is going to have a first brush at some of these same issues that we've just been unraveling next Thursday, and then the 30th is really kind of a safety valve.
Yes, Rachel.
Well, and then we should know by our special meeting, our regular meeting, on a work session on Tuesday the 28th, whether there has been an extension in the due diligence period or not. I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking to everything else being resolved and know all those details, but I would look to the 28th to know, has there been an extension in the due diligence period? And if not, then, as you've said, all the other things click into place about letting the contract expire and exercising our right to pull out.
I'm a little confused on that point, if I could just ask a couple of questions. By the extension of the diligence period, is it the board's intent then to essentially propose a counter to the contract that's out there to extend the diligence period, which was originally a 75-day period, to something longer than that? And if so, if that
that counter to that term is not accepted, then there would be no contract and it would be done. If, or is it the board's desire to enter into a contract and then negotiate for an amendment to extend? I'm kind of confused as to how we're going.
Let's have some more suggestions.
I agree with John completely. I think what you're saying, which is, I think we should authorize an ordinance to counter the offer, and if the counter is not accepted, it's done. That's the way I see it, because why leave things to chance? I don't see us getting this resolved with the homeowners association, with open space and trails, with bringing our board back. I mean, I understand you want to stay in a contract till the 3rd, but that doesn't do us any good if we can't make a decision before the 3rd. So I would say this ordinance should read that we want to counter the offer with a longer due diligence period to some point no sooner than, say, mid to late September. Pick a date that works, and then we have 3 weeks to discuss and determine. And then if they don't accept our counteroffer, as you said, the contract would be null and void, because we're basically null and voiding their offer with a counter.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would not want to proceed in that way. I think we want to get to the same ends, but I think it'd be better to have the contract in place, let them know that we have issues that we may not be able to resolve in the due diligence period, and would be likely to exercise our right to pull out of the contract unless they are in agreement to an amendment to the contract to extend the due diligence period. I frankly don't want to be doing any counteroffers now from an action at this table, because there may be things disclosed or uncovered during the rest of that due diligence period that makes a counteroffer in price necessary. And so I don't want to go back with them with one counteroffer now to extend due diligence and one counteroffer later to change price. I think that we should, at least have a contract in hand. I hate to continue to have these guys working, and we're either going to, again, I just see us as finding out by about the 28th whether they've been willing to extend the due diligence or not on the contract that we have agreed to exercise. And if they say no, then we pull out. And then if we're able to resolve those issues by the end of the due diligence, or we find new issues that make us uncomfortable with the price, we again can then exercise the extended due diligence period right to pull out and make a full counteroffer at that time of a new price or terms.
This is difficult. This is very difficult.
I think we're all floating with duckies right now.
George, do you want to make it more difficult?
Running around.
No, I just want to get our attorney's advice how to do this to cover us.
I think you know what we want to do.
Well, that's why I asked the question, actually, because I did. Well, I know exactly what Rob is expressing, and it sounds though, Rachel, you're in a different position, that you're going forward with this contract authorization as is, and that as part of the diligence period examination of the quality of title and the aspects of the property and other things, that we are going to be needing an extension of that diligence period, and if it's not forthcoming, we'll be in a cancellation. And I guess in my mind I'm a little confused as to the sequence of events because of when the BOCC would be meeting, because I think that I'm sure Dale could find out relatively quickly, like within basically a week, as to whether or not they're going to be agreeing to an extension of the diligence period or not, and that would precipitate if they're not, it sounds like that would precipitate a cancellation relatively quick. I mean, like next week. If that's a fundamental issue, if that's not, or do we let that go and then preserve it just to cancel closer to the end of the month and see where we are with other discussions with the homeowners association, potentially RMI or
yeah, that's how I perceive it. Yeah, that's just me, but I still see that we could get an update on the 28th, and if they have not, extended our diligence period. We'll have to make a decision on the information we have at that time from all the work that Dale and that board has been able to do. It's relatively likely we would exercise the right to pull out on the 28th.
Got it. Then I completely understand where you are and where Rob is, and all we have to do is
Decide between
decide
the two.
as to who gets the majority.
So on the 28th, we'd have a special meeting, is that what we would do? That's typically a work session, right? So we'd have to convene as...
I don't know that it'd be
I
a
don't think
formal
we need
action.
it.
But we could make it a special meeting, that's
It
not an
just
issue
says
anyhow.
that we have to determine the adequacy of the agreement in satisfaction with its contingencies.
Which would typically be an administrative action, so I think we could do that in the work session.
But we could make a special meeting in the work session if we need to, and just notice it.
If the board is taking an action, you need to be noticed for the action. We can have a closed discussion to talk about the parameters of the contract and so forth if you'd like, but we would come out and we would have a public discussion about the action that the board wants to take or not want to take. And so I would go ahead and notice it. The 20th, though, is a Monday.
The 28th is a...
Oh, I'm sorry, 28th and the Tuesday.
28th is a Tuesday. But in theory, we should know fairly rapidly about this thing. So the 28th, it gives us time before the end of the contract. We could do it even sooner if we wanted, so...
You know, the other item to consider, of course, is that Dale has been having a lot of things transpire on this particular negotiation, and open space and trails hasn't been brought up to date and won't be until the 16th, and they may have a wholly different recommendation than was originally made based on the additional information and so forth, and that...
Can I just add a little bit to that?
To
what John just said about the likely reaction of open space. I think this conversation today has been fascinating as far as is access into WinStar that's guaranteed a mandatory component of the county's interest in this. And I think the Open Space Board would be very interested in your views of that, in helping them form their decision as well. Because it's the first time that question's come up. So. If you had a recommendation or a statement back to them to help them in their deliberations, I think that would be useful as well.
Yeah.
For me, I think we shouldn't complicate things. Dale has brought us, at second reading, a contract, gives us a due diligence period. We know what the dates are. I think we should approve this today with the direction to staff to say, to continue the negotiations and discussion with the road association, and to go to the property owner and say, we want an extension, and we are working with the road association, but if we do not get the extension, we're going to cancel the contract. Because that, I don't see how we can get, unless a miracle happens with the road association, and I appreciate you bringing up the compliment part of that too, because that, they have been pretty great about responding. I don't see how we're going to get this done, and if the property owner wants to sell this property, they're going to have to work with us. And really, my second point is, get us that extension. I mean, you want to sell it? It's on the table. Well, let's have a little more time.
We've all made that point, I think, as well. So,
Well,
Rachel?
again, to me, if we do not authorize a contract today, and we're then talking about counteroffers, I don't know what the Open Space Board will have to talk about on the 16th, because there won't be a contract, And so I think we move forward with what we have discussed today. We have an ability to withdraw from the contract in the diligence period as it's set now. We're asking for an extension of that period so that we can potentially resolve the remaining issues and potentially move into a closed contract. And if the seller is unwilling to do that, we have an out, and we can just exercise that on the meeting of the 28th.
That's essentially what Jack has been saying. I think, George, you're comfortable with that? And Rob, that gets us to essentially the same.
Yeah, I don't want to get counters.
And so, where are we now? Do we a motion?
And public hearing.
Public hearing. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this Shieldo contract? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Is there a motion?
I would make a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing the acquisition of the Shieldo Commons parcel with the direction to staff of the conversation that we have just had in terms of the intention of the board.
Is there a second?
I'll second that and define at least some of those factors, which is extension, road association, title, all of the above.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, Dale. That wasn't that hard, was it?
That was great.
Well, good result.
And if you guys say we're done on the 28th, I might be able to cancel my meeting on the 30th. That'd be nice too.
Yeah, there you go.
There's value here, so.
I think, Dale, you should stay close.
Yeah.
Okay. The next item are land use public hearings, the Ashcroft Touring rezoning, and it says to be tabled. Is that a motion, is that something we need to do, to table it?
Yes.
And tabling signifies that the issue is no longer going to be considered at all?
Well, I can't speak for Suzanne or Lance, so I'm not sure if the intent is to table it with no continuation. In other words, basically suspend activity on the request, or whether the intent was to not so much table it, to continue to another specific date and to discuss the item then. I don't know.
But typically, we have a sort of a continuance asked for, and I haven't seen to be tabled on our agendas, I don't think, ever in my experience. So there's some, I don't know what they're asking for, and we don't have a rep here, so.
I
Yes,
would
Rachel.
suggest that perhaps
Take a
we
break?
take a 15-minute break and see if staff can resolve what the appropriate motion would be on those two items for when we come back.
That's an excellent idea.
That's what I've had all day.
We're gonna take a 15-minute break. We're gonna reconvene at approximately 3 o'clock. And staff, if you can connect with the proper people, that'd be great. It's a little past, on August 8th of 2012, it's a little past 3, we're taking a break. And our next item is, it is the Ashcroft Ski Tour and rezoning, and we have a note here, it says to be tabled, and we had some questions about exactly what the nature of that tabling was. Suzanne, can you answer that for us?
Yes. So this is all part of the Ashcroft application, that part of which you considered and acted upon at the end of last year. That was the ski huts on the Montezuma Mill site. What remained outstanding in terms of proceeding with the application was the Star Mill site, where the residence is located today, and potential conversion of that. We have been continuing this item, waiting for additional information and sort of further work with John Wilcox from Ashcroft Ski Touring. Nothing has really proceeded at this point, and the notice on this is fairly stale, I guess is the best way to describe it at this point. We've been continuing this since sometime last year. So we just notified John that basically what we'd like to do for now is table it, not have the incessant continuances. When he's prepared to proceed and bring back new information, we will renotice and bring these items back in front of you. So this just kind of clears the slate for now, where we don't have to keep continuing it, and presumably it will be back in front of you at some point once we have some new information.
Is that okay with the board?
Does it require an action?
Well, I think we will have to make a motion to table.
I think so, because we have continued it as a public hearing to this point. So this, by tabling it now, then it kind of ends it until we renotice.
It looks like we're never really going to end with John Wilcox, though. My experience has been 8 years straight of hearings with John Wilcox.
He's a nice enough guy.
So, is there a motion to table the Ashcroft ski touring rezoning, and can we, at the same motion, table the Ashcroft ski touring ski rec master plan amendment?
So moved. Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Suzanne. The next land use public hearing is the Anthony's Brown Constrained Site, TDR, designation to historic register and historic incentives. Suzanne, you want to get us up to date on this subject?
I guess probably Dale is actually probably the better one to bring you up to date at this point, since he was on the site visit last week, and kind of give you provide an update on the new information.
Great, Dale, go ahead.
I understand you've all received a copy of the letter from the state archaeologist, Richard Wilshusen. I want to pass around another letter that just came in last night from the Archaeological Conservancy. Both organizations were represented at a site visit that we did last week, and I have to tell you, it was quite an experience to look at this site in the company of Kevin Black, who is the assistant state archaeologist, and whose comments are incorporated into the letter from the state archaeologist. Kevin Black was able to walk around that site and not only see the number of stone tools that are laying around up there, but to look at each one and tell us roughly the time period that it was created, and also give us information about the likely source of the stone that it was made out of. But in sum, what he determined is that the human habitation or human presence on that site continued over a very long period of time. Some of these tools were 8,000 years old, and some were, he speculated, were much, much newer. And the point of interest, one of the ways you can tell that is the distance between the notches on notched tools. In the earlier period of time, they were relying on things that were more like spears, and the distance between the notches allowed for a much larger diameter shaft to be sewn onto the tool. But in the more modern period, of the closer proximity to our own time, that distance shrank as they converted to arrows. And so I guess their technology was increasing. They had more accurate projectiles that would go further, but they were smaller. So in any event, the comments from Mr. Black are in the one letter from the state archaeologist's office. The Archaeological Conservancy did some further analysis, and although the state archaeologist had noted that there's 18 known sites with some archaeological importance in Pitkin County, this letter from the Archaeological Conservancy notes that really this one is unique in having artifacts that are representative of several different time periods. I received an email then subsequent to this today from the state archaeologist that's confirming that you shouldn't be too focused on this number 18 historic sites in Pitkin County, and he corroborates what this Archaeological Conservancy is saying, that because of the long time span and the number of tools from different time periods, really the site that we're talking about now is pretty unique in Pitkin County, and Mr. Black in his letter, or his comments that are acknowledged in Wilshusen's letter, says he's only seen a handful of sites of this quality in the entire state between, I think, what's he say, Pagosa Springs and Steamboat Springs. He made that same comment to us at the site, that he was really blown away, and this is what he does for a living. One other point of interest I wanted to make is that Kevin Black was good at helping us understand the state of high-altitude archaeology in general, and he noted that whereas the Anasazi sites, the low-altitude sites that are down in the Four Corners area, have been studied pretty intensively for over 100 years, the science of high-altitude archaeology is a relatively young science, and consequently, you can't get the amount of peer-reviewed archaeological sort of consensus about these high-altitude sites that is available if you were looking at something down in Mesa Verde. He commented that really the archaeologists have only been focusing on this stuff up here for about 20 years. So, given all that, the sense I walked away with is, from the point of view of some pretty impressive archaeologists, this site is quite special and definitely merits protection to allow both the protection of the artifacts that are up there as well as study for some from the knowledge that will come off of it. The knowledge of they call them archaic Indians, and although I don't like the sound of it, that's the scientific term. The knowledge of the archaic Indian habitation of the high mountains could significantly be enhanced by a study of this site. Having said all that, then, one of the missing pieces in the last discussion with you all about what to do up here was the absence of a management plan for what the prudent management of a site of this caliber should really entail. We just yesterday received a draft of that plan, and Mr. Brown has not had a chance really to read it or comment on it. Mitch Haas is not available today. Consequently, we're not in a position to really talk about where we think this ought to go in terms of management of the site. I did want to thank David Brown for welcoming a continuing troop of experts to come up there and see what's up there.
David, I'll call on you, but not right now. Okay. So those larger projectiles, were those from an atlatl, throwing spear?
I don't know. That's possible. Kevin Black also found a thing that was sort of C-shaped. It was like a knife point, but then it had a smaller appendage to it, and he showed us how those were held in between two fingers and used in your fist.
Gang warfare.
Punch a bear in the face.
Well, probably for skinny. Suzanne, let me ask you something. One of the main hurdles here has been that the county doesn't have any provisions for preservation of archaeological sites, although it has provisions for historic sites. Would it be possible to, as we're just about to do, is to amend the code to include archaeological sites and include provisions of TDRs and that kind of thing in the provision of archaeological sites?
We certainly could beef up the code, in this realm. I mean, we did find reference in the historic regulations in the code that does make reference to archaeological sites. I mean, I think we could make that leap under the code as it exists today. It certainly could use refinement, in the future. There's kind of dual provisions here that are at play. I mean, essentially, their initial request was really just to deem this constrained.
Right.
Grant the TDRs on that, basis. But obviously, sort of that realm that we've worked with historic preservation and incentives and that kind of a thing, probably feels maybe more comfortable to us to deal with this kind of a site as opposed to the pure just, if you're constrained, then you get TDRs. So anyway, I think there is leeway under the code as it exists today to address this under our historic preservation provisions. Certainly, that could be.
And those provisions would be the same, but do they include some sort of management plan for an archaeological site, or can we ask for that in our
There's nothing specific to a management plan for that. I mean, I think that, do you have the archaeological language? I mean, it talks about.
I think there's criteria for inclusion in the historic inventory, and one of the specific criteria is prehistoric occupations. So it is called out as something worthy of our historic inventory. When you get over to the, talking about the historic register, then we've kind of lost the detail of that, and we talk more about association with notable individuals, historic theme to which the resource is related to the county's history. That's something that clearly would fit. The level of integrity of location, setting, design, materials, workmanship. It starts being more related to buildings, but I think that there is enough here that probably the same kind of incentives that are offered for historic register properties that we think of as buildings could probably be offered for an archaeological site if it has some kind of covenant associated with it, just like we do with a building, where the owners agree that certain things will happen.
Right. So, Suzanne, so what does that precipitate? Is that, would we request of the applicant to sort of go back and refine his application for an archaeological designation to the site?
I mean, I think we have the context to work within here. I mean, I think, and the applicant had agreed to either, do a conservation easement on the property if the TDRs were granted. I think that's kind of the context we're talking about. This management plan would be, an element related to that conservation easement. That's, the people who've come in to work on a draft management plan, they're in that business of having conservation easements or dealing with people who are conserving properties to protect them for archaeological resources. So I think that all ties together. At that point, the limit, I guess, at this point is that we've just received this report, the draft management plan, and no one has really had an opportunity to review that yet. So at this point, we were definitely prepared to request that you continue this again until your next meeting, which is September 12th, at which point everyone will have had time to review that and sort of further refine the request that's in front of you and see where we all stand in terms of our recommendation.
So I'm just trying to get, so the applicant has asked for a constrained site, but we think it's more appropriate for an archaeological site designation. So within the context of this hearing, we can do that? Or does the applicant have to say, forget the constrained site, I'm going to change it to archaeological site? I mean, I just don't, I'm asking a procedural question more than anything.
It would, I would defer after I speak to John, but it would seem that if we were going in another direction, the applicant should agree with the other direction that we're going.
John, we all defer to you, but what's your thoughts on that?
I can't imagine that the applicant has a concern about what code mechanisms are employed to arrive at what is objective.
Well, and I think the code provides for TDRs under either scenario, whether it's constrained site or historic preservation archaeological. So he's right. I think the point is that's what they're looking for, whatever the mechanism is to get there.
So George, and then Rachel, you have questions too?
So then to follow up on that, the question then would be in either case, whether constrained or archaeological site, it's again usually up to the discretion of the OCC in terms of how many TDRs may be granted. So there's nothing said in the code saying, this allows X amount, this allows X amount. Okay. And then the other comment I have for Dale is, the only thing I'm questioning on this report is the note that, where is it? Coupled with this site's high altitude mountainous setting. I guess if I lived in sea level, it might be considered a high altitude mountainous. But as part of the Colorado Plateau, which goes all the way through Utah, and the elevation is very similar to archaeological finds predominantly in Utah as well. So I question that high altitude mountainous for this particular area, since I'm well aware of this area.
You want me to comment on that?
I mean, I would not consider that I live in a high altitude mountainous on the high altitude mountainous property.
You're in the valley.
You've been living there too long.
You're way down
You're
low.
low.
300 feet higher.
This is written from someone that comes from
Anyway, that's the only thing, my comment. Because he talks about the uniqueness of this because of this setting in relationship to perhaps Mesa Verde or other areas in Utah that are probably at similar altitudes.
And perhaps there's another element to that, which is the archaeology of civilizations that were primarily agrarian. I think it's been easier to do, and maybe he's also sort of talking about the nomadic nature of the people that lived up here, given that we didn't find any structures, stone structures that would have stood it over the years. So I'm just inferring that that comment about the mountainous setting was partially a reference to the more nomadic lifestyles of the people that we're likely seeing the remains of.
Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Michael. I guess at a purely logistical level, I think I could move forward with this after seeing the management plan under the provisions of constrained site TDR with the conditions that we had looked at before related to National Register and our state register, seeing an application to both of those state register. My concern is, and I think we've heard from our staff, both Lance and Suzanne, that it's written broadly enough and references items that would allow us to do so. But I am concerned about the time element of really beefing up and enhancing our historic preservation code. I'd like to do that. I think that needs to be done, but I see that as a series of first and second reading with our P&Z, and then a first and second reading with us, and that could be potentially a very lengthy process. And I'd like to make sure it's done thoroughly, not just for this one application, in such a way that takes into consideration some of the broader ranges and the potential conditions we might put on use of those provisions in the future. So for me, it's more about seeing what is in the management plan, and what type of covenant would be on the properties that may protect them, and have that discussion and the discussion about what is the appropriate incentive, as George has said. We know the applicant is interested in 2 TDRs, and that I think is approximate to cover the cost of the investment in the parcel. There's some unknowns for me here because I don't know what will be the cost of implementing the management plan, and so that's a little bit of concern to me. I also know the broader question of whether it's 1 TDR is appropriate or 2 TDR is appropriate has not been decided by the board. I mean, I was somewhat hopeful that our open space board might see their way fit to purchasing a conservation easement and assisting in reaching a certain value level that would, accompanied with 1 TDR, be appropriate. Because I still would reiterate my concern, it's a little bit of a position, but however you want to express it, that by essentially sterilizing this parcel, it will both preserve the historic site, potentially with the right management plan, but it really won't allow for public access. It really won't allow for public viewing, and that's necessary to protect the site. But I think it will enhance the neighboring values of the other parcel. It's kind of rare to come in to sterilize an existing parcel with TDRs that will not be used on the adjacent parcel. And it reminds me too much of how lots merge within our community. And I do think there will be an enhanced and increased value for the Browns, Anthony's Browns lot next door. And so how do you capture some of that value in the transition so that it's not a windfall above and beyond what is appropriate for the preservation of the site?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that, Rich, I think that if there's a management plan that's of sufficient complexity to protect this site, that might not actually be viewed as an asset to any owner, quite frankly. So, I mean, I understand your concern, but if there's enough protection going on and enough leeway for excavation, study, and that kind of thing, that might not be something you actually want near your house. But Rob.
Well, I mean, obviously we'll get a lot of information when we hear or see this management plan, but, we just had the most significant prehistoric site up in Snowmass, and they went and they excavated, and then they covered it up with a reservoir. So it's not to say that a management plan might involve getting all the information that you can get in a year period of time, and then there's nothing more to be gained from the historic knowledge from that, and then it's not really a constrained site anymore after that.
Yeah, it's almost an example, but I think there was a lot more knowledge to be gained from Ziegler Reservoir. It's just there was a time constraint of its purpose and use on private property that they needed to open the reservoir.
Some government official could have come in and said, you can't put the reservoir back there because we need to study this forever and ever.
No, I don't think there was any rights to do that on private property.
I mean, I can understand what you're saying. I don't think the Ziegler Reservoir is a good analogy, but in essence, I think that given, we just saw a very small portion of the 35 plus acres of that piece of property. The implication, it seems to me, that there is, I find it hard to believe that there's just one spot there that is subject to human habitation over the range of time that Dale said the experts were looking at, which is 8,000 years. That's pretty significant. So, who knows?
And that speaks to the concern that I think was raised, which is how common is this if we start seeing these, a couple arrowheads here and there on all sorts of land. Is everybody going to be coming to us for TDRs and constrained sites?
Yeah, but I don't think the reports say that. I think they say just the opposite.
It's not a couple of arrowheads.
Yeah, it's not a couple of arrowheads, and it's a significant. These are not people who are casual participants in archaeology. These are experts who say it's unique. Jack.
Comment, a couple questions. Ziegler Reservoir, covered with water, they can drain it, excavate again. Plus the fact that there was no human elements, I don't know what term I need here, no human bones or whatever found. No one could stop the process, and my staff might know about that stuff too. But on this application before us, I have several questions. Under the code section of constrained sites, does it identify a historic site as constrained? Because we've never done that, so I don't see how we can do constrained here. And I'm certainly amiable, next further meeting, having an understanding of what's before us, consistent with timing. Rachel, you're right, it could take X amount of time, but I just can't see how we can do this under constraint unless we just amend the definition of constrained. Maybe that's what you were after, I don't know.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at.
Well, frankly, I don't have it in front of me, the original packet that Mitch had produced, but I found there to be some validity in his argument about the eventual development of a site, what has to be avoided in a constrained site. And I don't have that language from his original memo. That's, it was what the code says about, development of such a site. And I've also been really noodling around the idea that now that there's been so much exploration and discovery and kind of vetting of the site itself, the significance of the site itself, I think it would put a tremendous burden on the eventual sale of that property, because whenever anyone who purchased it comes in to develop it, this site is now well-known, well-identified, documented, and it's got to be within our staff to say, well, you have to develop it in such a way that doesn't damage this resource. That's going to make it constrained. That's going to make it very difficult. So I guess it was more, again, of Mitch's argument way back when we were over in the Rio Grande room that I was referencing as applicable here.
Yeah, and I have all the memos, but I'm certainly going to not take our time to go research that. But I believe what's before us today is the decision whether to continue this, whatever. I think we should continue this, and let's get the information before us so we can get a path. I have no predetermined idea whether that TDR is under whatever code section, historic or constrained, should be awarded, whatever. I really have to understand what's the public benefit here? Really, passive historic sites don't appeal to me a whole lot. Like the one on Owl Creek Road where you can wave at the historic structure. The one I recuse myself from, because you can't actually go to that site, but they're going to have a plaque. Great. So those things don't interest me a lot. But is there something that can come out of this that is of significance to public benefit? I don't mean to this board, our staff, there's archaeological value here, and that's, what does it mean and how can it be used? I guess that's really what I mean here. And I can't answer that until I know more.
So I think Jack got to the nub of it, which is, I think we need to continue this.
I'd like to make a motion to continue this until,
I'll let you talk, David.
September 12th.
September 12th.
And I'll second that.
Okay, so I'm just going to let David talk for a second. David?
Just briefly, I did get a chance to look through the draft management plan. It's extensive. It's, I think, 4 or 5 pages long. It covers everything you can imagine in there as far as short-term plans, long-term plans, physical barriers. But there are some things that we would like to negotiate or talk to the archaeologists about. One in particular is that...
David, let me just stop you. We don't have that plan in front of us. There's not much use in talking about what you'd like to talk to the archaeologists about.
But one thing I was going to bring up, their main suggestion is to fence the site with a 5-wire barbed wire fence. And that's just an example of something that I didn't think the county would like. I'd like to suggest a change in that fence. It's not something that's going to be a physical barrier to someone who wants to come into the site anyway. So just as an example, there are things that we would like to work through before we present the plan, but it is extensive and it does include provisions for future study. It also provides for Native Americans to visit the site, students, all kinds of things. So I think you'll be happy with it once you do get to see when we come up with it.
Well, I think we've actually made a lot of progress here. Yes, Rob?
Yeah, and I'm just curious with the process here. Who is commissioning this plan, and are we not seeing the raw plan? Are you telling us that you're going back to make changes to this plan before we see the original plan?
No, that's why I didn't want the discussion to go very far.
They suggest a committee.
Yep, David, I think that's sufficient. There's going to be, in order for the applicant to get anything, one of the requirements we had was a management plan. And so that would be a point of discussion for us, whether or not we accept it. David's negotiations are different from our negotiations. And so if we require a 6-foot concrete wall around the property, that'll be one of our requirements, or not. So those are our decisions. David has his own requirements. And if that plan comes forward and we don't like it, we don't have to accept it. So, yes, Rob.
And I guess what I'm reflecting on is the plan that we're going to see, just so that I'm clear on this, is a plan that is presented and put together by the applicant and the applicant's experts. And it might be different from a plan that we would create.
Yeah, I see your point. Yes. Yeah.
I just want to note that the draft plan has been shared with both the applicant and with the Community Development Department. And I want to express appreciation to the Archaeological Conservancy. They volunteered to draft this plan at no cost to anyone, and they, I think, should be considered to be neutral public interest organization. So we can certainly track
Changes.
what changes happen, but Suzanne has the original draft, and so does David. It went to both of them at exactly the same instant when I forwarded the email. And I do want to thank these guys because they've so far donated time that they have to pay for through their private fundraising efforts.
That's right.
And I guess still a year and a half being a new commissioner, why are we not CC'd on that draft plan? Why are we being protected from that information?
Well, we're not. If you want it,
I'd like a copy of the draft plan. Thank you.
Well, but I will say that I don't think they're neutral, Dale. I think their interests are archaeological interests,
Okay.
and so that's not quite neutral. So there is a.
And if I could just respond, we got this 2 days ago, so that's why it's not part of your packet. That'll be part of future packets.
And just a clarification, Michael, so I understand that staff is going to go back, the usual process, work with Mr. Brown, come up with a plan to bring forward, and that's when we'll review it. I mean, it's great, you want to read it, fine, but...
We got this letter yesterday, too. And
Yeah,
we
no,
got that today.
I'm aware of all that.
When we were told information would be very short in coming because of the 2-week turnaround on this, that we were all given a heads up that we'd be lucky to get things on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, and I think actually, Robin, we're actually plowing new ground here. This is something that has not come before us, ever before. In the short history of Pickens County, that's from 1880 on, we're talking about looking at something that existed for 8,000 years. That's really, really significant. I mean, that's extraordinary. So, you're impatient, I realize that, but I think we'll work through this with full public disclosure for everyone. So there's a motion and a second for a continuance till September 12th. Is that correct? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, David. Thank you, Suzanne.
Hunter gathering. I have an election.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we had a public, that was a public hearing. I should have asked for public comment.
Go ahead. You asked him for comment, so that's
Okay. Phew.
the only
Well,
one
it
here.
will be inclusive of...
So the next item is the CCI, also known as the Castle Creek Investments, I think, not the CCI that we're more familiar with, Code Amendment. Suzanne?
This is a second reading of this code amendment. We were in front of you 2 weeks ago on first reading, and at the time, if you remember, there was a difference between the language that had been approved by, or recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, and subsequent discussion by staff and a change in that proposed language. You approved on first reading, but asked us to go back in front of the P&Z and see if they agreed with the staff recommended language. So that happened last week while I was on vacation, thanks to Lance. And they did agree and support the language that has been drafted by staff. So that is what is reflected in the ordinance that's in front of you in terms of the change in language related to the reduction of visible mass category in the residential growth management scoring as it affects rural remote parcels. So I think that's the short version. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So let me ask, so is the phrase applicants for a new lot or parcel in rural remote zone district shall receive the maximum score of 6 points in this category? Is that the item of discussion?
That is the proposed language. That is right.
which was adopted on first reading.
And P and Z approved of that particular phrase. Okay. Questions, Rachel?
Yeah. I want to ask Suzanne, I've been thinking about this a bit since our last meeting 2 weeks ago, particularly Jack's concerns, which he raised very articulately about automatic 6 points, the maximum. And what I've wondered, the argument was presented by the applicant's representatives that you really wouldn't be able to make threshold anyhow on maybe this particular application unless that was the rule. But I've wondered again about more the general applicability of the rule, and aren't there other rural remote lots where you might like them to stretch into some of these other categories to obtain their points rather than automatically starting with that 6 in the base. And so, I've kind of considered whether it should be an automatic 4 points with an additional 2 points available to go up to 6 if you just fulfill that first tier category under table 6.6, which is limiting the final maximum floor area to 75% of what is potentially available, and less than 20% would be built subgrade. And I just have wanted to think about how do you keep the competition a competition? How does this apply in other areas? And would it be something that should be more of the automatic 4 and not try to push for any of these further reductions that are for the greater rural area, but allow an option that gives you those last 2 points for doing some reduction, just so we don't see people ignoring the other categories because they've already put their first 6 points in the bag. And so I guess to restate the question more simply, is it possible to make threshold with only 4 automatic points in this category if you were doing the appropriate things in the other scoring categories?
Possible, yes. Again, it's all part of the game of how many points do I need in this category versus this category. So, right, if you're not giving them as much in this category, I'd have to play through the numbers, in terms of kind of what had been presented to you at the last meeting on, what percentage would they then have to meet on every other category to still meet threshold. So I don't think I have a straight answer for you.
Yeah, I don't know if you can think about while we're discussing this, because again, I mean this quite sincerely, I wasn't trying to think just about this application, but this is a code change that will affect all the rural and remote zones, and will having this automatic 6 points for building the maximum allowed in the rural remote zone mean that people will not make the same diligent efforts for a good application in some of those other scoring categories like wildlife protection or water enhancement, which other lots and other rural or remote zone properties may have available to them. So it's just a question for the board, but from my thinking, some of the earliest single-family homes in affordable housing up at Twin Ridge were all 1,500 square feet, and they weren't called cabins, they were called single-family homes, and at a 1,500 square foot, available in the rural and remote, it might be valuable to offer some points for some small reductions in size.
I thought it was 1,000 square feet.
It's 1,000? Okay, I'm sorry about that.
It's 1,000, but just to follow up, I thought when we looked at this and discussed this a few weeks ago, that even giving these 6 points, the applicant would still they would still have to come up with it wouldn't meet threshold just with those 6 points. They would still have to do some other.
Oh yeah, definitely. Either way, whether it's 4 or 6 points.
Right.
Again, there are all of the other categories. It's not by giving them 6 points or 4 points here that they've got it made. But do you have it? You're closer to having it made with 6 points, obviously, than a lesser number. You have to work harder in some of the other categories.
Yes, Rob.
And the other conversation that came up was in regards somewhat specifically to this application that came through here, was that they wouldn't make threshold with the 6 points, but if we still wanted to encourage them to have a mass reduction or a visual plane reduction or whatever, that potentially there'd be the 6 points, and I'm just saying what I remember hearing, that there'd be the 6 points. Maybe if they would get an extra point if they did do the 75% and the 20 subgrade. So that it would, at that point, go from a 1,000 square foot house to a 750 square foot house with 20% of that below grade, and they would get a 7th point there. I think that was part of the conversation.
There was some discussion about how do we continue to encourage some reductions, you're right.
And that way, they get the 6 points, but we're just saying, well, if you want a smaller house, then we're going to make it, you're going to score a little bit better with having some reduction as opposed to it just being an automatic thing.
Sir, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I just want to say...
Could you just introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. John Miller, I'm president of Castle Creek Investors. We can only qualify, we can only scrape up 14 points, and that was a little liberal interpretation to get us to the 14 points. The 6 gives us 20. It takes 22 to even meet threshold to be considered. So we're not there yet. And I think anybody in the rural and remote is, I don't know about the other areas. I'm talking about the Highland Mining District. When we'd only have 20 points, and my advisors and planners knew that. If it had been up to me, I'd come up with something that had given us 8 or 9 points, 10 points, so we'd have it over with, you know. We could get in there, but this is, we're still 2 points short, so there have to be other compensations made to meet threshold, just threshold. And if there's any competition, then we're at the bottom of the list. And we're asking for 1,000 square feet, you know, initially. And I think it's only a fair request, and so I just submit that.
Thank you.
So that should answer your question.
Yeah,
that
it
this
does.
is not an automatic qualification by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you.
Yes, Jack.
Yeah, I definitely want to get away with looking at John's application because it kind of skewers the discussion, I think. We're going to be looking at this from a code standard. I have to ask Lance a question. Lance, is there anywhere in the code where we automatically give something away?
Yes, in growth management. If you, for instance, have no wildlife habitat mapped on your property, you automatically get 2 points plus a multiplier, 4 points.
Oh, good. Okay, so there's some precedent here. Well, you know, for me, again, and I'm being somewhat repetitive from my last time we talked about this, it just is not right to give a full 30% of the 22 points because we don't think 1,000 staff's, I think, representation is 1,000 feet isn't that in square feet above grade is not that impactful. Well, this discussion is somewhat tainted because we know John's site a little bit, we'll say, you know. But is there somewhere else in rural and remote where visibility is important? Will there be another time, but we just 6 points? You know, I think with a little bit of thought in this, such as what Rachel has suggested, and I'm not saying that's the exact path, but a little thought here, we can preserve the integrity of this element of the rural and remote residential scoring system related to visibility and still allow applicants to be able to build what they want if they can meet some criteria. And that's the key, if they can meet some criteria. This site might be, well, you know, it's not visibly impactive, whatever, and well, so you would award the points because they earned them, not because it's an automatic rubber stamp, and that just bothers me. And I can see how what you've just used for an example, well, you have a couple-step process to get there, to the 4 maximum, I assume, is that in wildlife. So that's what I'm asking the board to consider. Let's just think a little bit in depth to come up to be fair, but preserve our discretion when we need it.
Jack, I mean, from my point of view, that if you set up a system that you can't possibly achieve, that's not a fair system. If you cannot, and we haven't had GMQS for rural and remote come in front of us of the nature that Mr. Miller brought in, so it's hard to compare. It's actually, I think, a fairly rare event, but. And I agree that you should earn these things. However, it shouldn't be a system that you can't possibly achieve what the goal is. That's unfair too. So you have to put it within the realm of some kind of competitive possibilities in order to have a fair system. This, as testimony in front of us, even with the 6 points, you don't come up to even minimum standards. You still have to earn it in other ways. And you can do that by reduction in mass if you wish. And then you get up to a minimum standard. And then if there's an enormous amount of competition, or just any competition, you still have to beat that competition. So it seems to me fair. I just don't know how to get to it. So
You said you can do that in the event of minimizing mass, but I don't think that's what this proposal is, because you're getting the 6 points and that's it.
Yeah.
I proposed the idea of an additional point
Bonus
if you hit this first threshold here. But that's not what's in front of us today. Right now, there's no additional points granted for any reduction below that 1,000 feet.
Okay, yes, Suzanne.
Just a couple of thoughts, I think, in response to Jack. I mean, one is that obviously any development in the county is subject to site plan review, so the issue of visibility, or are you visible from public roads, will still be addressed. So that will still be subject to the criteria that everyone else is in the county. So we're not totally walking away from any visual impact. And I think then, just to get back to sort of why staff supported this in the first place, was that discussion about rural remote and feeling that we've gotten to the point where we agreed that 1,000 square feet was appropriate, that a 20-foot height limit was appropriate, that these were appropriate limits, and therefore that we weren't necessarily viewing growth management as a way to exceed the standards of the code. Which is really how, I look at growth management. A lot of times, the way the scoring criteria read, you don't get any points if you're not meeting the code, you get 1 point if you do, and you get 2 points if you exceed the code. I mean, that's the way a lot of it works. So, yes, we are trying to get exceptional projects out of growth management, but I think, that to us, rural remote was really different because, we have limited it to a degree where we really haven't limited any place else in the county. So we feel like that was the appropriate level of development. So again, just a little bit more background, kind of where we were coming from on our support for that.
So, any further discussion? Do we want to modify it the way Rob suggested? Yes, Rob.
And with modifying it, it's got to go back to P&Z. And I think one of our concerns, or at least our respect for the applicant in the other application, was that they were going to try to get in the GMQS for early September. So my suggestion with what I had suggest with the extra point bonus is to approve this as is, and then go back to P&Z to look at whether they are in favor of that extra point bonus and handle it as a separate code amendment.
Okay.
I agree with that process, and that way we can leave it a little more wide open for P and Z to look at, where it fits into the scoring sheet, and, it may not have to be exactly one of these categories on the little sheet. Maybe there's a special rural and remote reduction. Maybe it's only 20% instead of 25. Maybe,
Yeah.
If they do 50% reduction, it's 5 point, who knows. But let's ask them to continue to refine it, but move this forward today. And
Yes, George?
You ready for a motion?
Certainly. Jack, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know if I certainly never have to demonstrate anything to anyone, but I can agree with, okay, let's get done with this today, but send it back to P and Z and not limit them how they're going to solve this, but the direction of the commissioners, the majority of the commissioners are uncomfortable with automatic granting of points, and let them see if they can solve it. Because that's really what I think I'm hearing. Well, Rob has an idea. It just might be efficient, but we need three of us to direct that of staff.
I think actually the automatic, this is actually a separate category. I mean, we're really treating rural remote as a separate category from normal GMQS. And so I really don't view it as an automatic granting. I just see it as a categorizing of this particular subject into a different point structure, and that's the way I look at it. If it included all the housing, all our GMQS competition, then it would be an automatic granting. This is different. We're developing a substructure for rural remote.
Sure. I think I'm hearing what Jack is saying. I would suggest that we make a motion to this that's in front of us, and then discuss whether or not we want to send back the additional issue.
Yeah,
if there's board approval.
I agree with that.
The additional.
I agree with that. That's, I think, right, and I agree with Jack. I just don't agree on the categorizing it as automatic throughout the GMQS system. That's all. So there's a.
I'll
George is going to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, amending the following section of the 2006 Pickens County Land Use Code, Title 8 of the Pickens County Code, Section 6-50-20C4, reduction of visible mass.
Second.
Any further discussion?
public hearing?
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and proceed with the vote.
Michael?
Yes, Jack.
Yeah. I think my statement, my request is reasonable, and to delay that gives me nothing in return, so I can't support this. I mean, I'm sorry, that's the way, this is a chess game sometimes. So I'm going to abstain, because I would hope that we do direct some in-depth discussion at P&Z. But I can't vote for this without knowing that the next step is really a reconsideration of how to refine this and accomplish all the goals we need. Because as far as I know, Webster's defines automatic as automatic, and automatic is automatic to me.
Jack, I think the general direction is to give direction to P&Z, and I don't think we would change our mind after this vote, but we could, I suppose. So, all in favor?
Aye.
I would respectfully refrain from the vote, so I'll abstain.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Yes, Rachel?
I don't think we need a motion for this. I think we need direction. But I think that I would like to see if the board as a whole would like to direct that P&Z take up the issue of a further discussion of this matter, and whether there should be additional points available for reduction of visible mass in the rural and remote zone at some level, in some way, or whether, a different way of approaching Jack's same concern is, should there be a lower threshold for rural and remote homes using the same old scoring system we've always had, rather than automatic points? maybe just 51, 50 of another. But I do agree with the concept of leaving the discussion broad enough and framing it for our Planning and Zoning Commission in the terms that we would like to maintain the sense of competition in the process, and we want to make sure we've examined this with the broad applicability to all rural and remote properties as opposed to a site-specific application.
So the board agree with that direction? So we'll give that direction to staff. And I just want to thank Mr. Miller for the time that you spent on this issue, bringing it to our attention, and I think we've come up with an improvement to our code because of your concerns.
Well, thank you. I thank you for the time you've spent on it, all of you, and the consideration. And the staff, they've been very helpful.
Good. Thank you. And good luck in the competition.
Yeah, thank you.
So...
Go sell your ducks.
Yeah, sell some ducks.
You got to get some forms.
Thank you.
I already got my ducks. Probably.
So the next item is the Board of County Commissioners open discussion. I know that we wanted to have some discussion about how to deal with the Red Mountain Road trail crossing, and that was one item that we'll just talk about. What, John, do you have?
Well, that was actually on my list, so maybe we'll start there. It would.
Wait a second. I have to recuse myself from that discussion, and I have to drive to Denver tonight. So maybe if you're discussing Red Mountain Road, you do it last when I leave?
Well,
Okay.
if I could, just real quick.
Okay.
I was going to suggest actually we don't talk about it in open discussion, but that we have it, even if it's an MOI, posted on an agenda so that the public has an opportunity to know that we're going to visit about that. We could do that because timing is important there. Is going to suggest doing it as an MOI next week. We don't really have time on our agenda to set an hour aside, but I'm not sure you'll need an hour, but we can give us some. Well, and if we feel differently, we may want to push it back further. But if the board does have any desire to move forward with the project, we do need to have that discussion sooner rather than later. But I don't think it's appropriate for us, given the amount of public interest in that, to do an open discussion.
Well, that sounds good. Sorry, Zach.
Yeah, George.
I agree with that, but I think when you look at the agenda for next Tuesday, we should allot an hour. I mean, there's 5 of us, you figure out, 45 minutes anyway.
We're either going to have to come in early or stay late then.
Well, we should plan that, so we have the time to have a thorough discussion, to be able to make a good decision and not feel rushed.
Yeah. I can come in at 7, so...
You get to review.
Mark, so the discussion, just to explain to you what's happening, is that rather than have a discussion here now, we're going to have a memorandum of interest, and that will allow noticing for that discussion, and so a full public participation can happen. So thank you for being here, but that's the direction I think that we're going.
Just one correction on that, though. If this is going to be a work session item, typically work session items, we don't have public comments, public discussions. It's up to the chair, and if we're going to have that, then you need to really make sure you've got enough time.
Yeah. It depends. It's circumstantial as far as I
Let's let the chair make that decision.
Well, yeah, and we'll have that discussion. We do have the airport. We have some big items coming up next week, so we may have to push it back, but I think the bigger point is let's find a time where it can be advertised.
Yes.
And appropriately discussed.
Okay. Yes, Rich.
Just along these lines, and not that I'm an early morning person, should we at least give John the leeway of knowing that we'd be willing to start at 9:30 a.m. on that morning, and then he can work with the schedule as it's posted?
You start whenever.
Okay, so I would suggest that.
Okay, great.
All right. Just a few brief items. I think you've started to see we've got our regional meetings getting posted in future agendas. We did just hear from Gunnison County yesterday, and I have some good news and bad news. The good news is they do want to come over here to visit with us this time. However, the date that they can come over is September 10th. which yesterday, Rachel, I think you said you.
We already
you were
have
gonna be
abatement
out of
hearings
town.
too.
And we have abatement hearings in the afternoon. We could,
I may be out September 10th as well. What day is that?
it's a Monday.
It's Monday following the Labor Day
I'm
week.
not going to be here September 10th. Sorry, I missed telling you that yesterday. I said September 4th, and I'm going to be out. I come home on September 10th, so I'm en route. I won't be here September 10th.
Well, it's even worse news.
And Michael was going to be maybe not, what
Yeah.
date
He
was
wasn't
that?
here for the 4th, but not,
Yeah.
he didn't say anything about the 10th.
Okay, so George, you're not going to be here on the 10th either,
that'd be
which
four to
would make
three.
it an even meeting.
So it's a Monday,
3
yeah.
to 3.
3 to 3.
We can see if there's another date they could travel. I know they were having some difficulty scheduling their 3 board members to meet with us and make that trip.
We'll tell them that we would like to meet as a full board, if it's possible. If it's not possible, well,
Okay. And then it sounds like on the abatement hearings, should we be trying to find another day? Because we've got 2 of you out now. Or are you comfortable making that, you saw the quorum with 3, that you can make those decisions?
how long is that scheduled for?
Right now, it's scheduled all afternoon.
1 to 5.
1 to 5, yeah.
That's on the 10th?
But you'll be a lot faster with 3 of you
I was
than
gonna say,
5
it could
of
be
you.
1 to 4 with 3 of you.
I'm comfortable with doing it with 3, but
We've done it with 3 before.
Yeah, I'm comfortable
So
with
that's
that.
fine.
Okay.
you're comfortable because you're not going to be there, right?
That's right. No, I think that's the value of having a 5-member board, frankly,
it is.
you know.
Any other
Okay.
open discussion?
Just real quick on, and some of these were future agenda items, I'm sorry we didn't get to. August 23rd at 2 o'clock, there is a ribbon cutting for the East of Aspen Trail. I don't have a lot of details about the event, but it'll be 2 o'clock at the entrance to Difficult Campground. And there's a request, if there are commissioners that'd like to attend or even speak at that ribbon cutting, that we go ahead and notify Open Space and Trails. So
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
it's August 23rd at 2 o'clock at the entrance to Difficult Campground. There will be a ribbon cutting ceremony for the East of Aspen Trail.
What time is it?
2 o'clock.
I can be there for that, since I live on the East of Aspen Trail.
Rachel?
It's your
And that's the bike race day.
Bike race day.
That's the exit day, 2 o'clock.
I may be able to attend. If you have someone else who's firmed up who can say some words on the board, that's fine. But I could have sworn we did the East of Aspen ribbon cutting. Maybe it was when they were breaking ground a year ago. So,
bridge.
and I did attend that one for us. So,
Yeah, 3 of you.
so yeah, Rob, if you want to do the honors on this one, that's fine. And I'll try to attend if I can.
You said 2 o'clock, right? Sorry.
2 o'clock, yes. And then the last thing, just to clear up from yesterday, the question was asked about why the Aspen Caucus meeting had been posted on our future agendas, and actually that was a request of the East of Aspen Caucus that we noticed that. So. And that's all I've got for open discussion.
Board, any open discussion? Yes, George?
I have one, as I mentioned during Commissioner comments regarding Senator Bennett's draft bill, I think as a board, we should be sending him a letter of support. We could have staff draft that up, and I think all of us should sign it as well.
Is that fine with the board? Okay.
I haven't read the bill yet, but I'm in support of the idea of it. I just haven't read the bill yet. I'm not going to sign a letter supporting something that I haven't read.
It's on his website.
What's his website? Didn't you get that this morning?
We got
It's www.bennett.senate.gov/Thompson Divide.
I believe 2 days ago we were all copied on an email about it with a link to it. I haven't gone to read it yet.
It's short, so it won't take very long.
Yes, Rachel.
Kind of piggybacking off that, but it's something I've been thinking about, and I'm just throwing it out as an idea for the board. We don't have to make a decision on it now. But the Thompson Divide, natural gas leases, the history, very complex, very, involved with a lot of emotions, a lot of different issues. It has struck me that it may be valuable for our board to consider a letter to the editor type of thing that expresses our board's intent and desires in that process. It evolved from my thinking of my own, well, should I send a letter, of what I believe about this? And then I thought, no, that's not appropriate. It'd be much better for something coming from the board. And I realized we don't do that very often. We send letters to our congresspeople, we send letters to the agencies, but we've kind of just depended on the press to maybe quote a few individual quotes of ours in a larger meeting about a small aspect, a small segment of it. And so again, I'm not asking for a final decision now, but it seemed that it might be appropriate for us to make a bit of a declarative statement about what our interests are, what our hopes are, what our desires are, something like that. It's just put it out there for you guys to noodle over for a little while, and we can talk about it again in the future.
Okay. So, any other open discussion? Yes, Jack.
Yeah, a couple things, well, several. I'm in possession of an October 18, 2011 memo from Suzanne relative to, quote, the consideration of historic designation incentive application for the NATO town site. Now, we decided to advance, before actually going to a meeting, doing a site visit. Maybe staff would consider...
Showing us around that one too?
Well, no, we ought to just have her pass this out so we're a little familiar with the issues and, remind us. So that's a possibility.
I agree with that.
We all received notification of acting force supervisor Sherry Hallenhurst's decision regarding the White Banks mine plan of operations. I wonder if we should not, next exec session, touch base on this with John Ely, just to see, is this the final, or whatever, right? Because it's had so many iterations. So that's just a question for John Ely. I'd like to put in the read box something that Dwight Shellman gave me. Why votes in Larimer County aren't as secret as you think. This was a very interesting thing relative to Marilyn Marks, etc., and her follow through with this county. So this will be available to read. It's very interesting, and actually the way he presented it to me is, Jack, this is interesting because this shows why they will not be public in Pitkin County. This is a good article. Last thing, John, and I have to apologize if this has already occurred. I was wondering if I could get a couple copies of that dog-friendly trail map. I don't know if that was followed through and I missed it, or because we made the request and I think you reported, yes.
Yeah, and I thought, Jack, I had emailed a link to you, so let me go and do it. I've been having some difficulties, so I'll go back and make sure it's sent. I've been having emails hanging for weeks at a time in my
But you know what would be even more appropriate if staff could make a couple copies and I'll distribute them to people that are interested, because I've got a couple people asking that.
Okay.
I appreciate the time here.
Is that it, Chad?
Yes.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Caitlin, thank you.